Our story begins as a man wakes up to find he has become a billionaire, the king of villains himself. But before he could even begin to enjoy his newfound wealth, the villain system arrived to dampen his spirits. The system detected his fate. He was destined to die as a mere stepping stone for the protagonist, all because of his spoiled son. In the end, the system warned he would die a miserable death alone under a bridge. Hearing this, he looked at his foolish son screaming in the hospital bed, who was still shouting at the top of his lungs. The boy bragged that his father was the great Sam. He received 2 slaps that silenced the room for shaming the family name. By disciplining his cursed son, he changed the plot and was rewarded with God-level toxic medical skills. He wondered if things could truly be this good, and he began to look at his son with an increasingly intense gaze. Only minutes earlier, he had just woken up in this body, and after processing the situation, he took charge. The driver in the front seat whispered that they had finally arrived at Sinai Hospital. Looking up, he noticed a line of text floating above the driver Leo's head, indicating his loyalty level. It sat at 90%. Well, at least he had someone reliable by his side. According to the original plot, Leo was destined to die while protecting him from a bullet. Outside the car, 4 men in black suits stood in a disciplined line, waiting for his arrival. With their fierce expressions, bystanders began to whisper that this was the famous Mr. Sterling of the Sterling Group. They noted he was even more imposing than on TV, and that he was likely there to visit his injured son. Without showing any emotion, he walked toward the VIP wing of the hospital amidst looks of envy and respect. As he reached the door of the room, he heard screams that sounded like a slaughtered pig. The boy was howling that the pain was killing him, making quite a scene for everyone to hear. The son even threatened a nurse, asking if she thought his father couldn't have her entire family fired. "Do you even know who my father is?" the boy screamed, claiming the entire city had to follow Sam's orders. He threatened that if she even touched a hair on his head, she could forget about living in this city. Outside the door, Sam felt his temples throbbing at the sound of this spoiled brat from the original story. He was looking at the very ancestor destined to ruin his own father and destroy everything they built. Sam threw the door open and stepped inside, causing Isaac's expression to shift the moment he saw him. Covered in tears and snot, the boy wailed for his father to take revenge on his behalf. He claimed a nobody had broken his leg, and he wanted the man cut into pieces and fed to the dogs. Looking at that useless face, Sam realized this boy was the reason he was destined to die penniless and unburied. Fury surged through him, and finally, under the stunned gazes of the doctors and bodyguards, he moved. He lunged forward, raised his arm, and delivered a full-blown slap, telling the boy to stop squealing like a pig. He coldly told Isaac that he had disgraced the family, each word cutting through the air like a knife. Isaac clutched his face, his eyes wide with disbelief as he asked if his own father had truly just hit him. Sam told the useless boy he deserved it, then delivered another slap while asking if he was still bothering the doctor. He threatened to break the boy's other leg, and surprisingly, disciplining the prodigal son successfully diverted the main plot. This act of parenting earned him 300 villain points from the system. Since it was his first time breaking his established fate, he was rewarded with a special beginner's gift pack. He received God-level toxic medical skills, and as the system notifications appeared before his eyes, a massive flood of information rushed into his brain before he even had a chance to react. These God-level toxic medical skills were truly incredible, containing hundreds of recipes for deadly poisons. Every single one was colorless and odorless, proving just how formidable these new medical skills actually were. We see that his mind was now filled with hundreds of recipes for deadly poisons. Every single one of them was completely colorless and entirely odorless, making them the perfect tools for a villain. He wondered what exactly these villain points were for, asking the system in his mind. The system explained that he could exchange them for real-world resources in the villain shop. Or, he could save up 1,000 points for a lucky draw to win enhanced skills or rare items. His eyes lit up as a shop button appeared right there on the interface. Upon clicking it, the most striking option was the ability to exchange points for cold, hard cash. One single point was worth a staggering $100,000 in this world. There was even a stock exchange option, 1,000 points for 1% of a major corporation. Seeing that exchange rate, Sam felt his heart begin to race with excitement. It seemed being a villain was quite lucrative. Those 2 slaps he gave his son were worth over 30 million. Feeling the ocean of knowledge in his brain, he looked at his foolish son. The boy was trembling in silence, and Sam couldn't help but flash a cold, calculating smile. He sat down on the hospital sofa and demanded to know exactly what had happened. Isaac, utterly baffled by his father's sudden calm, stammered, asking what he was supposed to say. Sam asked what else there was to say besides the actual facts of the situation. He noted that if he didn't know the full background, he couldn't possibly clean up the mess. He reminded the boy he was born with a silver spoon, yet managed to be incredibly clumsy. He finished his thought and glanced at the young man, who finally seemed to understand. Within seconds, the doctor was escorted out and the door was sealed shut behind them. Seeing that his father was actually going to back him up, Isaac perked up and began to complain incessantly. He exaggerated every detail without a shred of guilt, and 10 minutes later, Sam's face was dark with frustration. It turned out the boy had been flirting with a girl on the street when someone stopped him, sparking a fight. His bodyguards were easily taken down, and the stranger ended up breaking the boy's leg. A newcomer to the city who can defeat professionally trained bodyguards so easily is rarely just a commoner. To break the leg of the family's eldest son without a second thought takes a certain kind of person. That man, Sam realized, was likely the chosen protagonist of this world's destiny. The boy begged his father to get him justice, hoping for a swift and violent retaliation. Isaac gritted his teeth, claiming that breaking his leg was the same as slapping Sam's own face. He suggested that since the guy was too strong for normal people, they should hire someone much tougher. Sam growled in a low voice, interrupting him and asking if the boy really thought he could give orders. The idea of hiring an assassin was pure madness, and Sam listened as his son's nonsense grew more absurd. He was so furious his head began to throb. Only a complete idiot would suggest such a plan. Anyone with common sense would see that this was just giving the protagonist more experience points. It was a tired old cliché, and Sam took a deep breath, struggling to contain his rising anger. He told the boy he would handle it personally, ordering him to stay put and focus on recovering. Isaac flashed a wide, hopeful smile, but Sam simply waved a hand, telling him to behave himself. He warned that if the boy tried any secret schemes behind his back, he would take matters into his own hands. He threatened to break the boy's other leg himself, and Isaac quickly shrunk back, nodding with lingering resentment. Sam sat on the sofa and waited in silence, eventually ordering his assistant to call for the head doctor of the ward. Not long after, the assistant returned with the chief physician in tow. They were accompanied by 2 nurses, and the doctor greeted the powerful manager with a nervous bow. The doctor was visibly trembling, terrified that a single wrong word might bring disaster upon his career. Without even bothering to look up, Sam delivered his instructions with cold, direct precision. He told the doctor to treat the boy properly and to ignore every single one of his absurd demands. The doctor nodded frantically, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead from the sheer pressure. To be honest, he never expected a man of such wealth and power to be so strict with his own son. Satisfied, Sam stood up and prepared to leave the room with his assistant. But Isaac suddenly cried out, begging his father to wait and look at one of the newcomers. He pointed a trembling finger at a woman, his voice rising in a desperate shout as his father turned to leave. We see Sam turn his head, following his son's gaze toward the nurse standing beside the doctor. He looked her up and down, noting she was of average height and carried herself with a certain grace. She wore a crisp, white nurse's uniform, and her face was uncovered, revealing her features clearly. She wore no makeup, yet her pale skin and sharp, delicate features stood out against the white of her dress. She looked like she had been pulled straight from a casting call for a leading lady, a classic protagonist mold. Really? Sam asked in a flat, suffocating tone if she was the reason his leg had ended up in a cast. Isaac confirmed it, hissing that he would recognize her anywhere, even if she were turned to ash. The boy spoke through gritted teeth, his voice dripping with a deep, lingering resentment. The nurse, Sophie, stood there with a soft sigh, thinking of the half-day off she had taken just to go shopping. But she had the misfortune of running into this one, a spoiled rich kid who simply wouldn't leave her alone. If it hadn't been for a young stranger stepping in to separate them, she likely wouldn't have escaped his harassment. She never would have guessed that the troublemaker with the broken leg was actually this powerful man's son. And the most incredible part of it all, this man turned out to be the high-ranking manager, Sam. Since she had been singled out by name, Sophie decided it was best to keep her words brief. Isaac let out a sarcastic laugh, mocking the coincidence of them meeting again in such a place. He sneered that now that his father was there, none of them would be able to escape the consequences. Sophie straightened her back, asking why she should run when he was clearly the one who started the trouble. She spoke without a hint of hesitation, but Isaac simply countered by asking what it mattered if he started it. With a look of pure disdain, Isaac asked who had even invited her to interfere in his business. Sophie turned red with anger, retorting that in that case, he truly deserved the beating he received. Sam watched the display, eventually casting a cold, silencing gaze toward Isaac while speaking in a low voice. He noted that based on his son's own words, the boy had been chasing a girl and ended up humiliated. He called his son a useless embarrassment before turning to the nurse and asking for her name. Sophie felt a wave of nerves under his intense gaze as she cautiously introduced herself. She regretted the answer the moment it left her lips, wondering why he would even want to know her name. Deep down, she feared he was planning some form of revenge, and she instinctively lowered her eyes. Sam repeated her name slowly, lifting a hand to rub his brow as if weighing the situation. He remarked that the name was acceptable enough and told her not to worry, as he was a man of measure. He made it clear that he understood today's events. She hadn't caused the mess, and he wouldn't blame her for it. With a final, dismissive remark, Sam decided it was time for them to leave. Having said his piece, he turned around with his hands behind his back and walked away. Back in the room, the small crowd remained frozen in utter astonishment. No one dared to utter a single word, though Isaac stood there grinding his teeth in a silent rage. In his mind, he was cursing his father for being so incredibly weak-willed. He felt his father lacked any real authority, while Sophie, who had been trembling with fear just moments ago, found herself completely paralyzed by what she had just heard. The man she thought was a tyrant's father turned out to be surprisingly reasonable, or so it seemed. She wondered if he was merely pretending and planned to settle the score later. Not long after, Sam was already making his way out of the hospital building. He opened the rear door of his private car and settled into the seat. As soon as he was comfortable, he gave a firm instruction to his assistant, Leo, in the front seat. He ordered 2 men to keep a close watch on Isaac to ensure he didn't cause any more trouble. Furthermore, he demanded a full background check on that boy, Dan, and Sophie's entire family history. Leo froze for a brief second before nodding immediately, acknowledging the boss's orders. He pulled out his phone, promising to organize everything right that very moment. He made 2 quick calls, but as he worked, a voice as cold as ice suddenly echoed. Inside Sam's mind, it noted that he had successfully contained his rebellious son's antics. The plot had shifted according to a divine will, granting him 100 antagonist points. He had also managed to improve Sophie's negative perception of him as the host. A slight disturbance had rippled through the very lines of destiny itself. His antagonist value increased by 300, and he even recovered 10 points of aura. It seemed almost too easy, earning points just by saying a few choice words. With that thought in mind, Sam pulled up his personal attribute panel to investigate. Aside from those 10 extra aura points, everything else remained at a rather deplorable level. He wondered if the system would actually allow him to increase these specific values. He was curious about his physical condition, or perhaps even his natural charisma. The system explained that he could use his antagonist points to trade for items in the shop. This would allow him to strengthen himself, and his eyes lit up at the possibility. He brought up the interface and looked down to browse through the available options. There was a 1,000-year immortality mushroom listed for 500 points. Next, he saw a fundamental body-strengthening pill that caught his attention. It cost 1,000 points. Everything here was a top-quality, legendary tier item. Naturally, the prices were just as terrifying, so he decided not to buy anything yet. The priority was to save 1,000 points for a grand prize, which was far more cost-effective. While the investigation into the boy continued, the details on Sophie were already clear. By sunset, at the foot of the mountain inside a secluded private villa, Leo handed over a file with both hands, which Sam took and reviewed quickly. He couldn't help but sigh, realizing that money truly can accomplish almost anything. Sophie was merely an intern doctor, and her personal history was quite straightforward. Yet, surprisingly, the information he requested at noon was ready in just 3 hours. After reading the file, Sam nodded slightly. It was definitely her, without a doubt. He asked if there was any issue with Sophie, leaving Leo looking quite perplexed. Sam told him it was nothing, knowing that even with an explanation, Leo wouldn't understand. With a simple wave of his hand, he dismissed him, telling him to go rest. He promised to call if anything happened during the night. Leo bowed and exited, leaving the vast living room feeling suddenly quiet and empty. Sam was left alone with his thoughts, reclining on the sofa as he whispered her name. She was one of the heroines, meaning he was about to face a truly major player. The thought was interesting, and a small smile began to play on his lips. Simply by shifting her perception of him, he had already earned 300 points. He wondered what would happen if he actually won her over. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Sophie had just finished her shift, feeling as though all her energy had been drained. Inside her home, someone called out to boil water quickly because Sophie was arriving. We find ourselves at the traditional Chinese medicine clinic owned by the Tan family. The elder doctor, Thomas Tan, sat perfectly upright in his chair. Sophie had just parked her car when she heard her grandfather's unusually warm welcome from inside. She wondered why he was being so polite today and who could possibly have arrived. Sophie slowed her pace, quietly slipping toward the house to investigate. The conversation from within reached her ears clearly, urging the guest not to go to any trouble. "I'm in no hurry," a young man's voice replied, sounding remarkably carefree. And yet, for some reason, that voice sounded strangely familiar to her. Sophie's heart skipped a beat as she quickly stepped into the room to see for herself. Inside the living room, we see 2 people sitting together. On one side sat Thomas Tan, a man famous throughout the entire city. On the other was a young man dressed in incredibly casual clothes. He was half-slumped in a mahogany chair, resting his hands behind his head, quite relaxed, to be honest. Thomas called her over, eager to introduce his granddaughter to a new friend. He began to introduce him as Luke, but before the old man could finish, their eyes met. "Oh, it's you," Luke remarked with a grin. "What a small world we live in." Sophie stood there in utter shock, while Luke simply smiled back with a nonchalant air. Thomas looked on, completely confused, wondering if the 2 of them had already met. Sophie clutched her bag and pulled her grandfather into a corner, demanding to know why he was there. The old man, having missed the earlier context, stared blankly at the young man. Luke remained slouched and crooked in his seat, leaving the old doctor feeling entirely out of the loop. He explained that Luke was the son of one of his master's oldest friends. He had come down from the mountains on business and would be staying at their home for a few days. He asked if there was a problem, and to Sophie, there were many problems indeed. Sophie hurried to explain every single detail of what had happened earlier that morning. She told the entire story from beginning to end, leaving her grandfather gasping in disbelief. Thomas could hardly believe his ears, his beard practically trembling with rage as he processed the news. This young man had actually broken the leg of the son of the powerful Yin family. Sophie insisted it was true, claiming she had seen the reckless act with her own eyes. She pointed toward the sofa, telling her grandfather to ask the culprit himself if he didn't believe her. The old man, visibly shaken, turned his gaze toward Luke. Luke didn't even blink, speaking with a calm that was almost unsettling, as if there was no need for questions. He admitted to hearing everything and confirmed, quite simply, that he was indeed the one who broke the man's leg. Thomas panicked, pacing back and forth while wondering what on earth they were going to do now. His legs felt weak, and for a moment, it looked as though the old doctor might actually collapse. He warned Luke that the Yin family were not people to be trifled with. Deep down, he feared he wouldn't be able to protect the boy, no matter how much he wanted to. He suggested that Luke should leave the city immediately and go into hiding for a while. Luke merely let out a soft, amused chuckle at the suggestion. He told the doctor he was worrying far too much about a spoiled brat who only knew how to waste money. In his mind, no matter how powerful the Yin family claimed to be, they couldn't touch a single hair on his head. He promised that if they did dare to come after him, he wouldn't let the doctor's family get dragged into it. The message he was sending was crystal clear, at least to him. To Luke, the Yin family was worth nothing, and he had more important things to worry about, like his childhood engagement. He had come down from the mountains specifically to find his fiancée, and he wasn't about to let this stop him. But as Sophie listened to his casual confidence, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. Sophie had no idea how strong Luke truly was. She only knew that this entire mess had started because of him. If the Yin family followed the trail back here, they would undoubtedly strike Thomas and his family first. We moved to 7 o'clock that evening, where a man stood in the hall of a Lishan villa, unable to suppress a sigh. To him, guarding such a massive, empty mansion felt less like security and more like watching over a tomb. As his mind began to wander, the silence was suddenly broken by the sharp ring of the telephone. It was Leo, his voice crackling from the other end, claiming they had finally found the man who injured the young master. One of their scouts, a man named Mike, had seen the culprit with his own eyes at Thomas's Chinese medicine clinic. At that exact moment, the phone rang again, demanding immediate attention. Leo's voice returned, urgent and sharp, as he delivered the update from Lishan. They had tracked the man who attacked the young master, and Mike had spotted him at Thomas's clinic. He was laughing and chatting with old Thomas, appearing to be quite close with the doctor. The man on the line simply acknowledged the news with a flat, disinterested tone. Leo asked coldly if he should have Mike gather a few of the brothers to go down there and snatch the boy up. But he was stopped immediately, as that plan was far too reckless for the situation at hand. After all, any man capable of knocking out professional bodyguards was clearly not to be trifled with. He wasn't just some random thug, and sending more men would likely accomplish nothing at all. They couldn't afford to play into his hands, especially since this stranger was proving to be quite formidable. No matter how many men they sent, it would ultimately be a complete waste of time. Instead, he gave a surprising order. They were to go and file a formal police report. Leo was left utterly perplexed, his mouth hanging open as he tried to process the idea of going to the authorities. Yes, they were going to file a report. He spoke with a calm that was almost unsettling. After all, they were law-abiding citizens, and there was nothing wrong with reporting that his son's leg had been broken. Though he was still drowning in doubt, Leo hung up the phone and went to carry out the order. Meanwhile, Police Commissioner Miller received the news and found himself momentarily paralyzed by the weight of it. Without overthinking the situation, he immediately gathered his team for an emergency briefing. The officer on duty, Sarah, stood in her impeccable uniform with an imposing presence and asked what had happened. Seeing the grim expression on her superior's face, she instantly shifted into a state of high alert. Something big had happened, of course, as Miller explained with a sharp, urgent shout. He asked her if she knew Mr. Ian, the powerful head of the Ian Group. She knew him, of course, a model businessman who was constantly featured in the news. Everyone knew him, but the news was that his son's leg had been brutally broken that very morning. The culprit had already been identified, and Sarah was ordered to lead the team to make the arrest. She was stunned by the gravity of it, but she guaranteed that the mission would be completed. With that, Sarah tucked the documents away and began organizing her personnel without wasting a second. One team was assigned to review the cameras, while another headed straight for Thomas's clinic. At that same moment, back at the Lishan villa, a strange voice suddenly echoed inside the man's head. The voice informed him that as the host, he had failed to follow the established plan. By altering the original course of events, he had earned 30 fortune points and 800 villainy points. The system detected that his villainy points had finally reached the required minimum threshold. Deep down, he wondered if he truly wanted to unlock the system's mysterious lucky draw. A lucky draw, and just like that, the mysterious selection was complete. The voice congratulated him, announcing he had gained 10 years of fundamental martial arts mastery. We see him smile faintly at this, amused that anyone in this modern age still cultivated internal energy. The system confirmed it was entirely real, leaving no room for doubt. When the protagonist heals the wounded, he will depend entirely on this power to save lives. It seemed the protagonist was, without a doubt, a bit of a cheater. To be honest, it was expected. With that thought finished, he whispered his acceptance to claim the prize. Instantly, a surge of heat erupted from his core, spreading through every limb and bone in his body. The connection was successful, his internal energy was linked, and his physical strength increased by 20 points. His data panel updated immediately. Although the draw had cost him 1,000 points, he had gained a massive increase in power in exchange. A perfect deal, by any standard. At least now he wasn't a weakling anymore. But then, he remembered something else. There was also his poison technique. Just as he was enjoying the moment, a more important matter surfaced. He reached out and pressed the call button on the wall to summon help. He called for Fred, the loyal butler. Fred was a man in his 50s, who still walked with a certain vigor. He usually lived in the front courtyard cottage, managing all the daily affairs of the household. He addressed the young man with practiced respect. In less than 2 minutes, Fred appeared before him, asking for his orders. Our protagonist glanced at the display above the butler's head, 91% loyalty. Quite secure. It was exactly what one would expect from a loyal servant who had served the family for 2 generations. Once he confirmed there was no issue, he decided to get straight to the point. He grabbed a pen and quickly filled an entire page with notes. He told Fred to prepare everything on the list as soon as possible. The butler took it and glanced over the items. The man suddenly turned pale. The list included 2 packs of ginseng and 100 poisonous centipedes. There was also venomous scorpion liquid and the powdered fangs of a deadly snake. The butler hesitated, asking if his young master truly needed all of this. The first items were normal enough, but the ones at the bottom were all highly toxic materials. A bit concerning, to say the least. He told Fred not to ask questions, simply stating he would use them for something important. The butler bowed his head and left immediately to fulfill the request. He knew better than to argue. Our protagonist let himself sink back into the sofa. Such things might terrify the servants, but for a man with his unique skills, they were merely everyday ingredients. We see him look around the grand, glittering house. Just after sunset, he began to feel terribly bored. He decided it was time to find some form of entertainment. At that very moment, right in front of the entrance to the Thompson family estate, blue lights were flashing in a chaotic, rhythmic pattern. After finishing dinner, Leo was about to head out for a walk when he ran into Sarah, who was just stepping out of a car. His eyes lit up at the sight of her. Sarah, noticing his intense stare, frowned instantly. She wasn't exactly in the mood for company. Deep down, she knew his face matched the photo perfectly. There was no mistaking him. She walked directly toward him, flanked by 2 officers. And this is where things get truly interesting. "Name?" Leo asked, flashing a cheeky, confident smile. "Beautiful officer, are you asking me?" he teased. "Is there anyone else here?" That slippery, flirtatious tone only served to irritate Sarah even further. He had no idea, of course, that this was the classic opening move of a protagonist. "The name is Leo, officer. How exactly can I be of service to you?" She informed him coldly that someone had reported him for intentional assault. She ordered him to come with them for questioning. Leo was stunned into silence. Before he could finish calling it nonsense, the 2 officers had already surrounded him. He asked them to wait, wondering if they had the wrong man as he realized something was wrong. His expression shifted to pure shock. She asked if he had water for brains. She asked if he truly had no idea what he'd done before telling him to move. Sarah wasn't about to give him a single chance to argue his way out of this. The moment she finished speaking, she reached out to grab him firmly. Now, according to the original script, this beautiful and skilled police officer was a major character meant to appear much later. But now, things have changed. Due to the interference of the boss, Ian, the timeline has been completely scrambled. And so, we see that Leo has crossed paths with her far ahead of schedule. At this point in time, Leo hasn't had the chance to build up his powerful contacts. He hasn't made the connections or the name for himself that he usually relies on. Without any backup and facing the police, he lacks his usual layer of fake arrogance. And that, quite frankly, is the fundamental reason why one can afford to be an arrogant villain. In this moment, detained right in the middle of the street, Leo frowned as his mind raced. His thoughts were working at full speed, but a few seconds later, he simply stopped resisting. He told the officers not to bother and that he would go willingly, though he was still confused. Leo was handcuffed and taken away. When Thomas heard the news, he nearly jumped out of his chair. He couldn't believe his ears. His granddaughter, Chloe, rushed in to give him the full report. She explained that she had just been heading out to go shopping when she saw the whole thing. She watched as the police car stopped him and drove him away right before her eyes. Thomas began to panic, wondering how on earth something like this could have happened. He urgently told Chloe to come with him to the police station immediately. Chloe thought he was being a bit dramatic, but after a moment, she nodded and agreed to go. The news that Sarah had taken Leo into custody spread faster than the wind. Within minutes, even the chief of police, Sam, had heard about the arrest. To keep the situation under control, Sam immediately called for his driver, John. We returned to Ian, who was so bored he was counting cracks in the ceiling until this news arrived. Without saying a single word, he called John and prepared to make his move. He floored the accelerator toward the station. When the door of the Rolls-Royce opened, a group of young officers quickly approached to offer their respectful greetings. They wished him a good morning, and he acknowledged their hard work with a simple nod. He waved his hand with total indifference, a gesture that left the officers quite surprised. a leader of such immense power, yet seemingly without a single trace of arrogance. Right this way, Mr. Ian, a young officer stammered, quickly offering to guide him. At that moment, we see Ian following behind John with a calm, unhurried pace. So, you admit it was you? It really was you, wasn't it? Leo simply flashed a toothy grin and gave a casual shrug of his shoulder. And what if I don't admit it? I own what I do, simple as that. Sarah was absolutely furious, realizing this man had clearly intervened just to save someone else. But he was being incredibly stubborn, maintaining a completely carefree attitude through it all. This nonchalant behavior was, quite frankly, driving her to the brink of madness. Just then, the door to the station's interrogation room was pushed open. Ian stepped inside, arriving just in time to witness this tense little scene unfold. The moment his eyes fell upon Sarah's face, his heart skipped a beat. This police officer possessed a complexion that was remarkably fair and clean. She had a face as delicate as a portrait from a gallery, complemented by a remarkably curvy figure. Previously, Ian had only thought of using Chloe to increase his standing as a villain. He had forgotten that in these stories, there is always a beautiful sister in the police force. Had he known, not even 10,000 villain points would have made him call the police. He wondered just how stubborn the protagonist's destiny really was. A fair question, indeed. He couldn't help but roar inwardly as he initiated a scan of his target. Leo, luck value, 3753, which, naturally, was a rather formidable number. It was confirmed, this man was indeed a child of destiny. Seeing this, Ian was left utterly speechless. Over 3,700 points. He didn't possess even a small fraction of that kind of luck. To be honest, he felt like giving up entirely. Just then, Sarah noticed him entering the room. She and her colleagues quickly straightened their posture. "Are you Mr. Ian?" she asked. He confirmed his identity. He had absolutely no intention of speaking with Leo at the moment, so he turned his attention directly toward the officer. "Officer Sarah," he began calmly. "He will be released. You know why I am here, don't you?" "You must know." Sarah nodded in understanding. "Mr. Ian, perhaps we can speak privately in another room." He agreed without issue. Sarah relaxed slightly and led him toward a private office. Without waiting for an invitation, he pulled out a chair and sat down directly across from her. "Mr. Ian, regarding the events of this morning, we have a clear understanding of what occurred." She began explaining that everything started because of his son, laying out the facts she had gathered. "That is more or less the sequence of events, Mr. Ian," she concluded professionally. "How would you like us to handle this?" Sarah watched him closely, waiting for his reaction. She was testing his attitude, but the room remained silent for a long while until he finally spoke. "The results of your investigation match exactly what I already know," he said simply. He told her not to wait for a reaction, insisting that the law be applied exactly as it should be. He claimed to be a law-abiding citizen who only wanted justice, a bold statement, indeed. Hearing this, Sarah was quite surprised, especially since the matter wasn't particularly grave. With his vast connections, he could have easily covered the whole thing up without a second thought. Considering this, Sarah suggests that, in her experience, it would be best for both parties to sit down and negotiate. If they could resolve the matter privately, it would certainly be the simplest path for everyone involved. Upon hearing this, Ian can't help but let out a small, amused laugh as a smile plays on his lips. "Officer Sarah, tell me," he begins, "how exactly do you think I should handle this situation? Am I expected, as the elder party, to sit down and negotiate calmly with a young man like him?" He asks how much compensation is expected, leaving Sarah momentarily stunned by the question. It was true, with a fortune as vast as his, he had absolutely no interest in any settlement Leo could offer. He tells her not to worry any further and stands up, signaling that their conversation has come to an end. He informs her that he will be assigning a lawyer to handle the rest of the legal proceedings. Seeing Sarah's somewhat forced smile, he decides it is time to make his exit without further delay. The thought of someone like Leo spending a few days behind bars is, to be honest, quite amusing to him. "We'll leave it at that, then. I have other matters to attend to, so I won't stay any longer." He thanks her for her time and extends his hand, maintaining a perfectly polite and professional tone. Sarah quickly assures him it was no trouble at all, as it is simply part of her official duty. Feeling a bit confused by the sudden shift, she reflexively reaches out and shakes his hand. In that brief moment, he notices how cold and soft her hand feels compared to his own. As she watches him leave the station with his driver, Sarah is left feeling utterly perplexed by his behavior. Normally, if someone knew Leo was being detained, their first instinct would be to use their connections to apply pressure. Wouldn't it? She wonders why he came in person, especially since she had prepared herself for a confrontation. But he had arrived and hadn't even spared the boy a single glance, leaving Sarah nearly breathless with surprise. Deep down, Leo mutters to himself that one day, he will make the entire family kneel and beg for his mercy. After all, nothing irritates a man more than being completely ignored. It is the ultimate insult. This dismissal, rather than breaking him, completely awakens a newfound ferocity within his spirit. Meanwhile, outside the station, we see that Ian hasn't actually departed just yet. A discreet luxury car pulls up nearby, and two people step out. Ian recognizes one of them immediately. "Well, young lady, what a profound coincidence this is," he remarks with a calm, observant tone. Finding it amusing that they would meet even at a police station, he smiles and approaches them without haste. "Hello there, sir," Tanya stammers, her expression shifting the moment she catches sight of him. He watches her struggle for words and asks, "What's wrong? Do I look like I've seen a ghost?" He narrows his eyes slightly, speaking in a tone that is clearly meant to be teasing. "This humble servant, Thomas, offers his greetings to you, sir," the older man says, bowing low. Tanya opens her mouth to introduce him, but the older man is far too quick for her. Thomas rushes forward to offer his respects, his voice carrying a hint of desperate urgency. While Tanya bows with a forced smile, Ian lets out a light, amused laugh at the display. "I know who you are," Ian says. "You are a very famous practitioner of traditional medicine in this city." He adds that he has heard quite a bit about the man's impressive medical skills over the years. "You flatter me, sir," Thomas replies, quickly bowing his head even lower in a show of humility. Ian assures him it isn't flattery, as his reputation has preceded him for a very long time now. "By the way," Ian continues, "what exactly brings a man of your standing to a place like this?" He asks the question knowing the answer perfectly well, which only makes poor old Thomas even more nervous. Deep down, Thomas doesn't believe for a second that Ian is unaware of the connection between him and Leo. In other words, he feels as though his very character and intentions are being put to the test. Having lived a long and full life, Thomas understands the delicate dance of human relationships all too well. He grasps the situation instantly and speaks up, offering a sincere apology to the young man. He explains that he only learned last night about the unfortunate altercation Leo had with Ian's son. Tanya opens her mouth to make the introductions, but Thomas is already stepping forward with haste. He bows with a flattering smile, prompting Ian to let out a soft, knowing chuckle at the display. Ian tells him that he knows him well as the famous practitioner of traditional medicine in the city. He mentions that the stories of the old man's impressive medical skills have certainly reached his ears. Thomas quickly lowers his head even further, insisting that such high praise is far too flattering. Ian assures him it is no mere flattery, as his great renown has preceded him for quite some time. Then, with a casual air, he asks what exactly brings a man of his standing to a place like this. To be honest, the question is a bit of a trap, and they both know it. The weight of those words causes a tight knot of anxiety to form in poor old Thomas's chest. He simply cannot fathom that Ian is truly ignorant of the relationship he shares with Leo. It is clear to him now that the other man is testing his loyalty and his attitude. Old Thomas has spent a lifetime navigating social rules, and he knows exactly how this game is played. Understanding the gravity of the moment, he speaks up immediately to express his deepest regrets. He reiterates that he only just discovered the trouble Leo caused with Ian's son the previous night. He adds that Leo is quite new to the city, which, naturally, is hardly an excuse for such behavior. He doesn't know the city or the people yet, so it is somewhat understandable that he acted impulsively. Thomas begs Ian to be magnanimous and find the generosity to let it slide just this once. We can see here that Thomas is truly a master of social maneuvering. His carefully chosen words actually hide several layers of meaning. First, by saying he only found out last night, he cleverly clears himself of any complicity. He also mentions that Leo just arrived, subtly hinting that their relationship isn't actually that deep. The old man comes to plead his case, appearing humble and submissive while keeping his distance. He seems to be yielding, carefully treading the line without offending either side. It is a triple benefit from a single move, but Ian simply smiles and addresses him as Master Thomas. Ian claims not to understand, insisting that he is just an honest businessman. His son was beaten, and he explains that his only recourse is to call the police. While Thomas asks for leniency, Ian maintains that he is merely a law-abiding citizen. He asks, quite pointedly, what power he could possibly have to interfere in public legal matters. However, he assures him that whoever made the mistake will simply have to face the consequences. He admits that in this particular matter, it was his own son who provoked the fight first. He insists he isn't the type to unjustly accuse anyone or shift the blame onto others. As for the specific dispute between his son and this young man, Leo, he expresses full confidence that the police will handle everything with absolute justice. He asks if Thomas agrees, leaving the old man completely speechless at the rebuttal. Seeing the silence, Ian waves a hand and adds that he really must be going now. With a final instruction for Thomas to stay put, Ian nods, turns away, and slides into the back seat of his Rolls-Royce. The movement is quick and decisive, leaving no room for further negotiation. But no one notices that just before the door closes, a cold smile plays across the corners of his lips. To think that such a massive problem could be brushed aside as if it were a minor inconvenience. Old Thomas is far too naive if he thinks Ian would go through the trouble of getting Leo here just to let him go. Ian instructs his driver, Larry, to call their legal contact, Derek, immediately. He wants the case handed over with clear instructions to find a way to keep the boy locked up for good. Larry acknowledges the order, though deep down, he is quite confused by his boss's insistence. He simply cannot understand why Ian is so determined to handle this through strictly official channels. The news reaches Derek quickly, and we see the gears of the legal system begin to turn. After hearing the full details of the incident, Derek slaps his thigh, convinced he has a winning case. He is certain that this time, Leo is definitely going to prison. While it is technically true that Ian's son threw the first punch, the retaliation was on another level. Leo's counterattack was, to be perfectly honest, shockingly violent. The other boy had barely raised a fist before Leo delivered a kick that sent him flying several meters. And as if knocking out the bodyguards wasn't enough, Leo took things a step further. He deliberately approached the fallen boy and broke his leg on purpose. That kind of finishing move leaves no room for a self-defense plea. The evidence is plain to see, and every single detail points toward a serious criminal conviction. Derek remarks that if they can't put him away with this, the police force might as well disband. If he can't win this, he really shouldn't be in this profession anymore. Leo arrived home at 9 that night, but before his backside could even touch the sofa, the doorbell rang suddenly, and the butler's voice drifted through the room. He announced that a Miss Sarah Moo had arrived to see the young master. Leo frowned at the news, but simply told the butler to let her in. Sarah walked in with a determined stride. She was Ian's personal secretary. Her full name was Sarah Moo, though most people just called her Sarah. Leo gave her a quick glance and nodded indifferently, gesturing for her to sit down. After the previous wife had left the picture, things had become complicated. There were several mistresses on the side, but Sarah was never one of them. And we might wonder, is it because she isn't beautiful enough? Not at all. The truth is that this woman can handle immense pressure, and the company simply cannot function without her. As arrogant as Ian may be, he wouldn't destroy such a vital pillar for a moment of fleeting pleasure. She began to report on the recent workload and the schedule for the following day. Leo nodded as she explained that today's executive meeting was postponed because of his legal trouble. It was rescheduled for tomorrow at 10. Additionally, Mr. Sullivan from the Sullivan Group has invited him to dinner tomorrow at 5 at the Grand Hotel to discuss the cooperation between the families and the Nishu project. She held out the itinerary. She asked if he wanted to take a look, handing him the paper with professional poise. Hearing this, Leo simply waved his hand with a growing headache, saying it wasn't necessary. He told her to just organize things herself, to which she professionally replied, "Understood, boss." She then mentioned she had brought a copy of the materials for the West City building project. Sarah continued reporting on the progress of the last few days with meticulous detail, and finally said her goodbyes after nearly an hour. And just like that, the workday was over. It had been his very first day acting as the CEO since his unexpected arrival in this world. The following morning, we see him appearing punctually at the corporate headquarters, ready to clean up the mess. Meanwhile, Luke had spent a long, cold night at the police station. He had just heard he might actually face prison time, leaving him completely stunned. Early that morning, Detective Miller arrived to formally announce 2 specific charges against him: excessive self-defense and intentional injury, which could mean at least 2 or 3 years behind bars. Luke's gaze turned cold as ice, and deep down, he nursed a bloody grudge against Leo's family. But as much as he hated them, he couldn't think of a single way to escape this situation. His friend, Thomas, looked at him with genuine sorrow, apologizing and saying it wasn't Luke's fault. Thomas claimed he was the one who hadn't seen the situation clearly, his face full of guilt. Luke spoke lightly in response, but in reality, he was far from pleased with how things were going. He wondered if Leo's family really expected him to just sit quietly in a prison cell. Not a chance. As soon as the thought crossed his mind, he began searching for a way out. Seeing the look in Luke's eyes, Thomas immediately intervened, calling out to his young friend. He promised that if Luke needed anything at all, he wouldn't dream of refusing to help. Luke regained his composure and offered a thin smile. In truth, there was a certain matter he needed help with, though it would be quite a bother. Thomas remained silent, waiting. Before his friend could even ask, Luke reached for his neck and carefully untied a jade pendant. He asked Thomas to please deliver this to a specific person. Protagonist successfully identified. Plot adjustment has been activated. 300 villain points gained. 20 aura points recovered. Leo glanced at the system notification and felt a slight frown tugging at his brow. Only 300? To be honest, his earlier call to the police had earned him 800. We see him walking toward the corporate offices alongside his beautiful secretary, Sarah. He walked with a focused expression, never once glancing to either side. Sarah, clutching a folder of documents, kept pace right by his side. She continued reporting on the various matters to be addressed in today's meeting. As she spoke, she occasionally stole a furtive glance at the man beside her. With his upright posture and a face that radiated both cunning and serenity, he was unlike any man she had ever encountered before. In her heart, he had become the very definition of a perfect man. It was a pity her own background was so humble, light years away from an elite tycoon like him. So she kept that affection buried deep in the corners of her heart. She didn't even dare to dream of him. "Hey, brother, you finally made it." On the 88th floor of the family headquarters, the elevator doors opened to a sudden greeting. Standing right at the entrance of the meeting room was a man in a sharp suit. With his hair slicked back with gel, he flashed a wide smile and offered a greeting. The Yin family had 4 children, and all 4 were completely different from one another. The eldest, Isaac, had spent over 10 years serving in the military. Being a man of few words, he avoided the spotlight and managed several luxury hotels. He sought only peace. The third brother, Ian, was exactly as his reputation suggested. He lived for martial arts, possessed an explosive temper, and ran various fitness centers. His portfolio included martial arts academies and several high-end nightclubs. The fourth sibling, Ivy, was a strong-willed woman who had studied abroad. She managed all of the Yin family's consumer brands aimed at the female market. They were an energetic and decisive family, and Leo was the second-born son. From a young age, he showed surprising business talent, so the old man gave him the core industries. At this point, we might wonder if the other siblings felt any envy toward him, but that was completely impossible. According to the usual cliches of these stories, villainous families often share one very specific and rather dangerous trait. They are united like an iron wall. If you strike one, the entire family retaliates. If you hurt even one of them, the entire family descends into a collective rage. This isn't just an act for them. It is simply their basic standard of living. Leo asked what he was doing there, and Ian explained he had come to deliver an invitation. With an air of complete nonchalance, Ian pulled out a shimmering gold card. "I'm getting married in 2 weeks," Ian announced. "Brother, you absolutely have to be there." He explained that he'd planned to give it to him at dinner, but feared Leo might forget. The news left Leo slightly stunned. "Getting married? Just like that?" Ian laughed, asking if it really seemed so sudden, considering he was already 38. He didn't seem to think it was urgent at all, flashing another one of his wide, carefree smiles. Then, he added that Leo should probably start putting in some effort of his own. With that, he shifted his gaze toward Maya and prepared to make his exit. He joked that he was still waiting to have a drink at Leo's wedding to Miss Maya. Leo stood there frozen, his face a mask of pure astonishment. Maya blushed even deeper than before, her ears practically steaming from the embarrassment. Regaining his composure, Leo frowned and asked his brother if he could ever be serious. The man was nearly 40, yet he still spent his days teasing Leo at every opportunity. Ian simply laughed, slapping the table in delight at his brother's obvious discomfort. The two of them exchanged a few more trivial words as the visit wound down. Ian pressed the invitation into Leo's hand and, without even staying for a bite, turned and left. As soon as he departed, the high-level meeting for the Yin family's leadership began immediately. Around the conference table sat every key member of the company's inner circle. Seeing everyone listening to him in total silence gave Leo a quiet sense of satisfaction. We see that this meeting didn't involve any overly complicated or tedious processes. The issue was simple. The development of the main plot of land was stuck in the approval phase. They discussed which real estate projects needed more investment and which connections required careful management. With his own memories to guide the strategy and Maya's help to fill in the gaps, these complex business matters were handled with surprising fluidity. Leo hadn't realized how much work was truly required until he actually sat through the meeting. From time to time, Maya would steal a quick, furtive glance at him over her black-rimmed glasses. We move now to 3 o'clock that afternoon at the grand estate of the Sullivan family. The head of the family, Arthur Sullivan, stood in his villa's living room with a deep frown, looking at his elderly father on the sofa with a sense of utter bewilderment. He asked what kind of person could possibly own such a specific jade pendant. Was it really worth it, he wondered, to go against the Yin family for her sake? The old man replied that whether it was worth it or not wasn't for him to decide. He slowly toyed with the jade pendant in his hand, lost in thought. The object had a strange, almost nonsensical shape, a mystery in itself. His voice was deep and heavy, carrying a weight that admitted no further discussion. He explained that this was a promise he had made many years ago. Back then, amidst total chaos, he had been running for his life with enemies closing in. That man had saved his life, but Arthur argued that didn't justify marrying Sophie off to an immature boy. Arthur sighed, clearly worried about the consequences of such a decision. He warned that if Sophie found out, she would surely cause a massive scene. The old man simply grumbled, asking what on earth she would have to complain about. Convertirse en la prometida del discípulo de ese hombre es su suerte. Otros rugan por algo así y no lo consiguen. Que tien el que protestar? Abuelo, papa, de que están hablando? Una voz clara y melodiosa sonó de repente, rompiendo la discusión en la habitación. Una figura con un vestido azul claro entró con elegancia. Su Yin ran, la única hija de su Jean Yin, tien 24 años. Mide 1, 65 metros, tien el cabello negro y liso, que si, naturalmente sobre los hombres. Y su rostro impecable y frío. Es tan hermoso que es imposible apartar la mirada. Yin ran, como es que estás aquí? Alvara su Yin ran en la puerta. Su Jean Yin se quedó paralizado. Con el rostro un poco sonrojado. Lo que el anciano acababan de decir. En ni siquiera lo habían mencionado una palabra. Olvide un documento aquí. Van a buscarlo. Dijo su Yin ran con indiferencia, y luego dirigió su mirada a su padre. Papa, acabo de orlos hablar de una prometida. Suena muy extraño. Su Jean Yin se sintió un más incomodo. Frotando inconscientemente la costura de su pantalón con los dedos. Se puede esquivar un redo, pero no para siempre. Y que lo oyo, mejor si lo decimos de frente. El anciano su agitó la mano con tono firme. Un compromiso infantil con una belleza de hielo. Este cliché es bastante común, pero según la lógica, este presidente de rostro frío no lo aceptará. The old man's plan was simple. He would bring our protagonist into the company to work. He would assign him a role as a driver or a bodyguard, and the young man, with his skills, would surely save her from danger multiple times until the Ice Queen's heart finally melted. As expected, the moment Sarah heard the news, she was absolutely furious. She flatly refused to marry, grabbed her documents, and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The old man sighed, while Stephen could only smile bitterly and shake his head in resignation. But the grandfather remained quite certain of himself. He believed that, in time, his granddaughter would eventually fall for the boy. Meanwhile, we see Mike asking his assistant how much liquid cash the company has available. Closing deals over a meal is a standard practice for many business circles. Because of this, the meeting between his family and the Miller family was specifically scheduled by Mike for 5 o'clock in the afternoon. His assistant reported about 60 billion. Mike nodded, resting his hand on his chin. It was enough. She offered to transfer the funds immediately if he needed them. He told her it wasn't necessary. He was simply curious about their current standing. He then instructed her to prepare for the meeting they had in a little while. For him, simply maintaining the family's current wealth was more than sufficient. Why bother with other ventures? No matter how fast other businesses might grow, nothing could be faster than taking money directly from the protagonist himself. At 5 in the evening, Mike and his assistant headed straight to the Grand Hotel. As soon as we arrive at the entrance, a man in a sharp suit approaches us quickly. He greets Mike warmly, introducing himself as Mr. Gordon, the manager of the establishment. He informs them that Mr. Sullivan is already waiting for them in the private lounge. Mike tells him to lead the way, and we follow them down the long hallway. Before long, we reach the supreme-tier private lounge, the height of luxury. Mr. Sullivan laughs heartily, welcoming Mike and urging him to come inside. Mike greets his uncle and notices a young woman, wondering if this is little Sarah. He looks her up and down, amazed at how much she has grown over the years. He almost tells her he wants to give her a hug. The words nearly slip out. Fortunately, he catches himself just in time and swallows the comment. Close call. Both families are among the most prominent billionaires in the city of Yorktown. While they know each other well, their relationship isn't exactly solid, though it isn't bad either. The Sullivans' main business is appliance manufacturing, where they have built quite a reputation. This time, however, they have come together to discuss a specific real estate deal. It was a bit of a mess, as the Sullivan family doesn't usually touch real estate, and nearly all of their capital is currently tied up in their appliance factories. But they have extensive contacts, so the Millers and Sullivans agreed to acquire the land together. The Millers will handle the development, while the Sullivans provide the connections for a share of the profits. Aside from the driver and bodyguard, the Sullivans brought 3 people: the patriarch, Arthur Sullivan, his daughter Sarah Sullivan, and a private secretary. When Mike saw Sarah for the first time, he was completely stunned. The girl was truly flawless, leaving absolutely no room for criticism. However, her gaze was as cold as a frozen lake in winter, the classic look of a distant, powerful boss. We've already seen a fragile nurse and a fiery police officer in our story, and now this Ice Queen appears. One has to wonder if she is also a lead heroine. Before a heroine establishes a solid relationship with the protagonist, her luck doesn't flow toward the antagonist, making her seem like an ordinary person. Because of this, one can't simply measure who the heroine is. It's mostly a guessing game. For now, Sarah certainly fits the profile, though he couldn't guarantee it entirely. 2 powerful bosses facing off, at least in appearance. Sarah seemed like the real deal, but he didn't dare make any promises just yet. It was a tense atmosphere, to say the least. She greeted them politely, but the real details were discussed between Mike and the secretary, Lily. Mr. Miller mentioned he heard the Sullivan boy got into a fight yesterday and ended up in the hospital. Before even touching the food, Arthur Sullivan was the first to test the waters and see if it was true. Yes, it turned out that the incident had indeed taken place. Arthur admitted that his son was technically the one at fault first, but the other party had been far too violent, striking him directly in a vital spot. He couldn't tolerate that, so he called the police, and the man was now in custody. It seems Arthur has shifted his opinion on the host. Things are getting complicated. And just like that, he gained 100 villain points and 10 luck points. Not a bad day's work. Mike raised an eyebrow, wondering to himself what exactly was happening. With just a few words, Arthur's entire impression of him had already shifted. He instinctively glanced at Sarah beside him, not expecting her to be looking right back. Their eyes met, and curiously enough, Sarah blushed slightly, a rare crack in her icy mask. It was as if she suddenly realized something was quite out of place. She quickly intervened to smooth things over, mentioning she'd heard Arthur was very protective. The rumors suggested he spoiled his son and indulged his every whim. But seeing him today, she noted that those stories seemed completely false. Mike laughed, telling Sarah she certainly knew how to give a flattering compliment. However, he admitted those rumors weren't entirely without a grain of truth. As he spoke, his expression became uncharacteristically serious. In his earlier years, he was so devoted to his career that he had no time for his son. He confessed that half of the boy's bad temper was due to his own overindulgence. But lately, he had reconsidered everything and planned to be much stricter in the future. He simply couldn't allow the boy to get into this kind of trouble ever again. He spoke with such apparent sincerity, though deep down, he was calculating his next move. He wondered if this little performance would earn him a few more villain points. It wasn't just Sarah who was surprised. Even her father, Mr. Miller, was taken aback. Even Lily, who had been busy chatting with the other secretary, stopped to listen. She turned to look at him, realizing Mike had successfully changed the heroine's perception. Sarah's perception of him had shifted. Villain points increased by 300. Luck points increased by 20. He had also managed to change the opinion of a key figure, Mr. Miller, earning him another 200 villain points in the process. With 10 more luck points added, he had finally met the requirements for a special reward. A lucky draw was now available. The system asked if he wished to proceed immediately. It turned out he could actually spin for a prize, a pleasant surprise, to be sure. But he wondered, did Mr. Miller really count? What kind of role did the man actually play? The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. Seeing the words, key character, made everything clear. He assumed this referred to those who, in the original story, were meant to help the protagonist. As long as he could change how these people viewed him, they would provide him with resources. He nearly slammed the table in excitement at the thought. If he had known this sooner, he would have provoked the hero even more, just for the points. The draw was a success. He had acquired max-level combat skills in an instant. He had always wanted to find a way to grow stronger and protect himself. Without a second thought, he confirmed the skill. He didn't even blink. Once the max-level combat skill took hold, a flood of new knowledge filled his mind. He was far more capable now than back, when he simply stayed at home doing nothing. Mr. Miller looked at him curiously, asking if he had recently learned some profound life lesson. It had been quite a while since they last met, and his aura felt entirely different. Mr. Miller took the wine from the waiter and personally poured him a glass of Romani Conti. Seeing the gesture, he raised his hand to accept the glass. Without showing any resistance, he took a small, thoughtful sip. As they drank, we see them exchange a few bits of trivial conversation. Once all the dishes were served, Mr. Miller set down his fork and changed his tone. To be honest, he admitted that besides discussing their cooperation, he had a small request and wanted to ask for a personal favor. Hearing this, he already knew what was coming and told him to speak freely. He hated beating around the bush, which left Mr. Miller momentarily stunned. Since he was being so direct, the older man decided not to waste any more time. He confessed that Leo, who fought with his son yesterday, had a connection to the Miller family. He said this while casting a furtive glance to gauge his reaction. Seeing that he didn't react much, Mr. Miller continued with his plea. He asked if he would consider not moving forward with the legal case. The goal was to stop the pursuit so the boy could avoid going to prison. Sure enough, it was all for Leo. Though the system reward had already hinted that Mr. Miller was a key character, he never imagined that to protect Leo, the man would actually bow his head and personally plead before him. That boy Leo had only arrived a few days ago, after all. How had he managed to win the support of the Miller family so quickly? It was the typical fate of a protagonist, always finding a powerful backer wherever he went. With such incredible luck, the old man would have likely been swayed by those words in any other life. Our protagonist pretended to think for a few seconds before speaking slowly and deliberately. To be honest, he told Mr. Miller that he truly didn't know the boy had such deep ties to the Miller family. He admitted that, in reality, it was his own son who started the trouble yesterday. He had originally planned to let the boy learn a lesson, but Leo had been far too violent. So, he had to resort to legal action, a statement that left Mr. Miller momentarily stunned. He then suggested that since Mr. Miller had spoken so clearly about his intentions, if he didn't agree now, wouldn't he be showing a complete lack of respect? He told him to forget about the compensation, as he certainly wasn't hurting for money. If the boy came to apologize in person, the whole matter would be considered settled. He asked Mr. Miller if that seemed fair, and the older man, filled with joy, accepted immediately. Based on what he knew of the man, he expected a demand for a fortune, not a simple apology. Mr. Miller didn't realize that this wasn't as simple as it seemed, to say the very least. In fact, getting Leo to actually apologize was going to be an almost impossible task. After all, have we ever seen a story's protagonist apologize to the supposed villain? If a hero ever did that, the fans would be the first ones to lose their minds. An elated Mr. Miller pulled out his phone and called his staff, telling them to go pick up Leo from the station. He told them the matter was resolved. Meanwhile, with calm decision, he called his assistant, Luke, to notify the legal team about the change in plans. With that single order, the investigation into the case was brought to a sudden halt. Luke immediately withdrew the legal team, putting an end to the investigation. Back at the station, Sarah finally breathed a sigh of relief, having feared the family wouldn't let this go. Otherwise, the officers would have been dealing with endless headaches every single day. At that very moment, we see Leo walking slowly out of the police station doors. Looking quite relaxed, he realized that the jade piece the old man gave him had certainly come in handy. The Miller family wasn't such a big deal after all, so he decided it was time to move on. The driver, with a cold expression, reminded him that Director Smith was waiting at the Grand Hotel. Leo simply smiled and agreed to go, showing no signs of being bothered by the man's tone. Before leaving, he took one last look back at the entrance of the station. Inside, the officers were already finished with their meals and were chatting comfortably in the air conditioning. Guided by the driver, Leo eventually stepped through the doors of the hotel suite. As soon as he entered, his eyes quickly swept across the room to take in his surroundings. There were several beautiful women present, but when his gaze fell upon Sophie, he paused. He knew the answer immediately. He truly hadn't expected such a stunning woman to be his fiancée. To be honest, her beauty could easily rival that of Diana, the woman who worked for Director Miller. Seeing Sophie in person was the best part of his journey down from the mountains so far. Upon seeing him enter, Arthur Smith immediately adopted the stern attitude of a family elder and asked if he was Leo. Leo tilted his head slightly, maintaining a respectful and polite demeanor throughout the introduction. He greeted Uncle Arthur warmly, and seeing that the boy was well-mannered and recognized his elders, Arthur nodded in satisfaction and pointed toward an empty chair, telling him to take a seat. Leo didn't need to be asked twice and took his seat without any further ceremony. Arthur began the introductions, presenting the man beside him as Director Miller. He assumed they already knew each other, but Leo simply sat there with a mocking smile. In a tone dripping with sarcasm, he remarked that if the director's son wasn't so blind, he wouldn't be in a cell. The moment those words left his mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Everyone's expression changed except for Leo's, even catching Sophie and her friend off guard. They wondered if the boy was a fool for daring to speak like that in front of such powerful figures. Calling the director's son useless was a slap in the face to both the father and Arthur himself. Arthur glanced sideways at the director, and seeing the man's growing anger, he tried to fix the situation. He asked Leo if he even realized what he was saying as the tension in the room became palpable. But Leo didn't back down, calmly telling Uncle Arthur that he knew exactly what he was saying. He explained that the son had acted like a common thug in public, trying to hit him while hiding behind bodyguards. If it hadn't been for his own quick reflexes, he would have ended up in a hospital bed. Before anyone else could speak, Arthur slammed his hand on the table and stood up in a rage. He called Leo a scoundrel, shouting that he had no right to speak about the director's family in such a way. He demanded that Leo apologize immediately, threatening to cut all ties with him right then and there. Watching Leo's arrogant display, Arthur's brow furrowed and his heart grew cold toward the boy. To be honest, he was starting to regret ever inviting him into this room. He couldn't help but compare the reckless young man to Director Miller, who sat there in silence. The director appeared calm and reliable, which only made Leo's behavior seem more absurd by comparison. Now that as a man who knows how to handle a situation, Leo cast a look of pure contempt toward Director Miller. He told Uncle Arthur that while he respected their relationship, this was where he drew the line. But as for bowing his head and apologizing, well, that was something he simply couldn't do. He spoke with a harsh finality, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Arthur exploded, calling him a cursed, ungrateful wretch and a complete scoundrel. He shouted that he truly regretted ever asking Director Miller to let Leo into the room in the first place. Arthur's voice trembled with such raw fury that he even began to use language he would normally avoid. Hearing this, Leo frowned and told Uncle Arthur that he never should have begged for favors on his behalf. He claimed that with his skills, it wouldn't even be difficult to help them dismantle the Miller family entirely. Before Arthur could even respond, he was overcome by a sudden dizziness and collapsed rigidly backward. His daughter, Sophie, was the closest and cried out in terror as she watched her father fall. The first one to react was Mike, who immediately saw this as his golden opportunity. He realized that if he could cure the man now, all his previous blunders would be instantly forgotten. Imagine the luck of a protagonist. The more desperate the situation becomes, the easier it is to turn the tide. Just as the bodyguards prepared to rush the man to the hospital, Sophie turned around, and the moment she saw Leo, her voice became as cold as ice as she called for the guards. She demanded they throw him out immediately, declaring she never wanted to see his face again. The two bodyguards didn't hesitate for a second and moved to obey her orders. As they closed in on him from both sides, Leo realized things were turning ugly and shouted out quickly. He claimed to be a doctor, insisting that Uncle Arthur was suffering from a sudden, acute attack. He warned them that if they didn't act immediately, Arthur would be cold before he even reached the hospital. Upon hearing this, Sophie froze, caught in a moment of pure, agonizing indecision. Even though Leo was partly to blame for her father's collapse, and she was utterly fed up with him, she realized his words weren't entirely without merit. The nearest hospital was at least 15 minutes away, and with traffic, it could easily take over half an hour, time they simply didn't have. Seeing Leo speak with such absolute certainty, Sophie began to doubt her own anger. Just as she was about to nod in agreement, a firm, steady voice rang out from the side. Director Miller told her not to believe a word of it. Sophie looked up and saw that Mike was already ordering the bodyguards to lay Arthur flat on the floor. Sophie reacted instantly, crying out that they couldn't just stand there and do nothing. In response, Mike waved a hand dismissively while keeping his fingers pressed firmly against Arthur's wrist. He told her to stay calm because he was there. He leaned down to check the man's breathing and began to unbutton Arthur's shirt. Leo, now absolutely furious, shouted directly at Mike. He accused him of seeking revenge under a false pretense, warning that delaying treatment would make him a murderer. This was Leo's only chance to turn the tide, and someone was snatching it right out of his hands. And who could blame him for being desperate? Mike simply told him to shut up. He spoke in a low murmur, clearly having no time to waste on Leo's outbursts. After confirming the heartbeat was weak, Mike quickly positioned the man and began to perform chest compressions. Everyone watched in stunned silence, surprised to learn that the powerful director Miller actually knew first aid. Leo, who had been perfectly ready to continue his insults, suddenly went quiet. He stood there paralyzed as we see the technique Mike was using. It was far too perfect. The rhythm, the force, and the positioning were all impeccable. To be honest, if Leo had done it himself, it would have looked exactly the same. Mike told everyone to step back and not crowd around, as they were only making things worse. He ordered them to leave space for air while he continued the rhythmic chest compressions. His tone left no room for argument, and quickly, everyone began to retreat. Sophie, having no time to overthink the situation, obeyed him immediately. She stayed by his side, her fists clenched tight in a mixture of hope and fear. We can only imagine her heart beating in perfect sync with every compression Mike performed. Fortunately, she didn't have to wait long. With the subtle help of his internal energy, Arthur's body suddenly twitched on the floor, and his chest began to show a faint, steady movement. Seeing this, Sophie let out a cry of pure joy. She told Mike that her father's pulse had returned, though Mike simply pressed down a few more times to be sure. Then he stopped and stood up, noting that her father clearly had an underlying heart condition. Combined with the intense emotions from earlier, his breathing had simply given out. He assured her that Arthur was stable now and suggested the bodyguards move him to the sofa to rest. Sophie, seeing that her father had recovered his strength completely, looked up at Mike with immense gratitude and thanked him sincerely. She admitted she had no idea he possessed such skills. It was, in a word, incredible. Mike simply smiled with indifference, stretching his arms and rotating his wrists as if it were all in a day's work. It was just a small trick, nothing special. At that moment, Sophie approached him quietly and offered him a damp cloth to freshen up. She handed him some paper as well, noting that he had worked up quite a sweat. Mike took the cloth and wiped his forehead, then glanced around the room, wondering where that boy Leo had disappeared to. Just then, the system's voice echoed again. Congratulations, host. You have outmaneuvered the protagonist and saved a key character. Villain points increased by 1,500. Additionally, you have recovered 500 luck points. Having reached the villain point limit, the system's skill extraction permission is now active. Did he want to use it now? There was no point in waiting, so he chose to draw a reward. He was given two options. 1. Play the piano like a world-class virtuoso. This would be at maximum level. 2. Become an expert dancer with impeccable rhythm. To be perfectly honest, both of these skills felt a bit useless to him. Playing the piano and dancing seemed like nonsense that served no real purpose. So he randomly chose the one that seemed more flashy, the piano. It would serve for showing off later, he figured. Meanwhile, Sophie was pleading for her father to wake up. A minute later, Arthur, who had been carried to the sofa by several bodyguards, slowly opened his eyes. Still dazed and confused, Arthur asked what had happened. His memory was a complete blank. Sophie explained that he had suddenly lost consciousness. She quickly told him that Mike was the one who had brought him back. The poor man had simply blacked out without any warning whatsoever. Sophie quickly explained that Mike was the one who had brought him back from the brink. As his memories slowly returned, Arthur looked at Mike with a sense of ever-growing surprise. Eventually, Arthur was taken to the hospital. Even though he felt recovered, his status demanded caution. A complete checkup was necessary, and naturally, his daughter Sophie had to accompany him. Before leaving, Arthur decided on the spot to hand over a 10% share of the profits from their massive joint project. We shouldn't underestimate that 10th. With the resources both families could mobilize, this business venture had a net profit of at least $5 billion. That 10% amounted to $500 million, a tidy sum for a day's work. The only thing that bothered Mike was that the boy, Leo, had completely vanished. He had planned to use the influence of the family to teach the boy a lesson. But that plan had failed, and to be honest, it left him feeling quite annoyed. However, he understood that taking down a child of destiny required a slow, patient approach. And as it turned out, Leo had indeed fled the scene in a hurry. After seeing the mess he caused and witnessing Mike's perfect medical intervention, the boy realized the situation had become far too serious for him to stay. But after escaping, the more he thought about it, the stranger everything seemed to him. The events of the last 2 days kept spinning around in his head like a puzzle. He felt that something didn't fit, especially when it came to Mike's behavior. He was acting without any clear logic. For now, his path with the family was over. He felt completely blocked, and deep down, he suspected the Tan family wouldn't be doing much better. Now, he had to change his name and appearance, disappearing entirely from the Een family's radar. Only by doing so would he have any chance of turning the tables. Once the decision was made, Leo already had a clear destination in mind. Kid, hand over the money. Just as he was lost in thought, 2 men with dyed blonde hair stepped out and blocked his path. It was, quite frankly, the worst possible timing. Leo kept his destination in mind, even as the demand for his cash echoed in the air. Just as he was planning his next move, those 2 thugs continued to bar his way. Each of them was brandishing a gleaming, sharp knife. They held their blades with clear, malicious intent. They certainly weren't looking for a friendly chat. He muttered that they had picked the wrong person to cross. In the very next moment, a series of sharp, pained screams began to echo from deep within the alleyway. Elsewhere, while the conflict unfolded, Diana watched Mike from the shadows as he sat with his eyes closed. The small spark of excitement growing inside her was becoming harder to ignore. She was truly astonished. Most wealthy men spent their days counting their fortunes, playing rounds of golf, or attending endless, hollow social events. But her boss, Mike, was different. He knew how to perform a medical resuscitation with such perfection. He possessed a level of skill that was, to be honest, quite unexpected for a man of his status. When he suddenly spoke, a startled Diana jerked her gaze away instantly, pretending to be fascinated by the view outside the window as the music began to play. Mike closed his eyes once more, his mind racing at a frantic pace as he processed everything. From the way Alex had reacted earlier, he could deduce that Leo had no real connection to him. It seemed the true support behind the scenes was actually the patriarch of the Miller family. Old man Miller himself was the one protecting Leo, moving pieces on the board to keep him safe. He realized it was highly unlikely the Miller family would seek out trouble over a matter like this. Still, he couldn't help but mutter that the boy was proving to be quite difficult to handle. Leo had effectively vanished into the shadows, leaving Mike feeling exposed and vulnerable. He was standing right in the spotlight while his enemy watched from the dark, a situation that simply couldn't continue. With that thought firmly in mind, he opened his eyes and prepared to give his next set of orders. He told his driver, Lee, to organize a team to track down Leo's current whereabouts the moment they returned. He emphasized that they must find where Leo was hiding, but warned them strictly not to get too close. The most important rule was simple. They were to observe only and absolutely must not take any action. After finishing his instructions, he suddenly shifted gears and asked Lee what kind of music he was playing. He insisted on a change, perhaps because his newly acquired world-class piano skills had sharpened his senses. His ears had become incredibly demanding, leaving Lee feeling completely bewildered by the sudden request to switch tracks. The poor driver only had 2 or 3 songs saved in the car's system to begin with. Since Mike never usually listened to music, Lee had just picked a few random tracks to fill the silence. Seeing the confusion, Diana leaned in and curiously asked her boss if he was in the mood for music. It wasn't a necessity, he replied, though his eyes lit up as a specific idea suddenly occurred to him. He told them to put on 1,000 Reasons to be Sad, a choice that was, perhaps, a bit dramatic. He suggested putting on 1,000 Reasons to be Sad, claiming the trip would be far too boring otherwise. It was an old song from many years ago, the kind of style he had always been fond of. Diana was visibly confused, thinking the title sounded like something he had just made up on the spot. Lee searched through the system extensively, but he couldn't find a single trace of that specific song. He told his boss that it simply wasn't there, suggesting that perhaps the name was incorrect. Upon hearing this, Mike frowned, a sinking feeling in his gut telling him that something was very wrong. He frowned and told Lee to search for the artist, Zansu Wu, instead, though the name sounded foreign to everyone else. Lee wondered if this was a famous singer, but even after searching again, he found absolutely nothing. Mike's expression darkened as a heavy realization began to settle over him. He reached out and took the pink phone that Diana was offering him to check for himself. And this is where we see him finally understand the truth. He had been reborn into a parallel world. While the general history was similar to his previous life, many famous artists and cultural icons simply didn't exist here. He waved his hand dismissively, feeling a wave of sudden exhaustion, and told them to just forget about the music. He decided he didn't want to listen anymore, as the realization was becoming quite draining to process. Without the legendary stars or the classic hits he knew, there was nothing left that felt worth listening to. The absence of those familiar songs he used to hum left him with a strange, hollow ache in his chest. But while Mike was dealing with his existential crisis, Old Man Miller was facing a much more immediate desperation. The patriarch had just learned that Leo had provoked his own son so severely that the man had fainted on the spot. The elder Miller ordered his driver to head straight to the hospital, demanding a full report on the incident the moment he arrived. He learned that a boy named Leo had appeared out of nowhere and, right in front of everyone, caused total chaos. Quinn pointed at the boy and began to insult him, questioning how an elder could act in such a way. He felt he could no longer just ignore the situation, and as the tension broke, he let out a long, weary sigh. He clenched and unclenched his fists, trying to keep his temper under control while the old man continued to speak. After listening closely, the elder's eyes sparkled with a sudden flash of insight, as if he had finally understood something important. Based on what you're saying, this young Leo seems quite a bit like his master was back in his younger days. Upon hearing this, Sam's eyes nearly popped out of his head in pure shock, wondering if the old man had lost his mind. He wondered if someone had cast a spell on him, as memories were fading and talented people often have peculiar temperaments. It's perfectly normal, the old man continued in a low voice, almost as if he were only speaking to himself. He dared to defend a complete stranger, which shows us that he truly has a good heart deep down. He even scolded his own son in front of Quinn, proving he has real character. Only someone like that is worthy of Sophie. Sam tried to snap his father out of it, his face a mask of total disbelief as he recovered his senses. He felt that the person who belonged in the hospital bed wasn't him, but this senile old man standing before him. If you actually heard the old man's words, you'd probably lose your nerve entirely, he muttered quietly to himself. It was only natural. After all, how could a mere mortal ever hope to resist the overwhelming influence of destiny? The following morning, Mike arrived at the office early, his mind heavy with thoughts of how to handle the situation. He had spent days worrying about the protagonist stealing his spotlight, neglecting the life he was supposed to be enjoying. Just thinking about it made him angry, so he pulled out his phone and called Alan to see if there was any news. They still hadn't found Leo, even though Mike remembered clearly that Leo's power level was a staggering 3,200. Meanwhile, Mike's own level barely cleared 700, making it incredibly difficult to track down someone so dangerous. Since his men were making no progress in finding the man who ruined his life, he decided to give them some direct advice. He ordered them to check the hotel cameras and the police station, as well as the local park. The bars and clubs were to be watched closely, as those were the favorite haunts of our protagonist. We see him lurking in the park, where he often meets a mysterious old man who offers him opportunities. In the bars, he either saves someone or starts a fight. To be honest, that's where the whole plot happens. The fans who follow his story know this by heart, though Mike's men didn't quite understand the logic behind it. Still, an order is an order, so they obeyed as Mike hung up and narrowed his eyes, planning his next move. According to the reports, Leo had officially left the Tan family, but Mike suspected the old man had given him a payout. Without that money, his business would barely get off the ground. How else could he afford to eat and drink so freely? Since the Tan family wanted to play the role of the Good Samaritan, Mike saw no reason to be polite anymore. With a cold smile, he picked up his phone again and dialed a very specific, private number. A sweet female voice answered on the other end, asking if he was looking for her. He began to explain the situation regarding the police presence in the settlements and the information he had gathered. The details were murky, but Mike was certain that Leo was hiding something behind that calm, stoic exterior of his. It was an invasive thought, one that kept him awake at night as he tried to piece the puzzle together. He felt that Leo's behavior was incredibly strange, lacking any clear pattern, which only made him more dangerous and despicable. It was almost as if the man had been born again, a thought that was as tempting as it was terrifying. Annie stood there, her body language betraying a slight sense of regret for what had just happened. A moment later, we see two women pushing carts filled with supplies, their faces set with grim determination. Imagine the scene, Mike standing alone in the center of the empty hall, feeling a sudden, sharp pang of fear. All those complicated relationships from his past had been ruthlessly erased, leaving him with nothing but his own ambition. Now, if he wanted to go on a date, he could only choose from the girls he had met after his transmigration. Ideally, he needed someone with the destiny of a heroine, someone to cure his boredom and help him grow stronger. But as it turned out, there were only 3 such heroines available to him. There was Sarah the nurse, Rachel the police officer, and the cold, dominant CEO, Sophie. With these women, he hadn't even exchanged more than a couple of words yet. Approaching them out of the blue would likely ruin everything, which was a risk he couldn't take. As for the other option, that woman probably didn't fit the heroine mold anyway. Besides, she was working overtime every single day, leaving her with no time for distractions. He decided it was better not to bother her. Flipping through his contacts, he couldn't find anyone suitable. So he changed into some casual clothes and decided to head out for a breath of fresh air. Meanwhile, in the surveillance room of the Blue Beck Bar, a young man in a security uniform sat, with his legs crossed, staring lazily at the monitors in front of him. Every single movement within the bar was unfolding right before his eyes. But the moment he spotted a woman sitting alone in a corner, he froze in complete disbelief. He wondered what Sophie was doing there. Just then, another security guard approached with a grin. He sat down and greeted him familiarly, asking Ben what he was watching so intently. This man was named Tony, a veteran who had been working at this establishment for 5 or 6 years. Ben replied casually that it was nothing, claiming he was just familiarizing himself with the environment. After a brief pause, he asked Tony if he had been working in this specific area for a long time. He gestured toward the screen, wondering what that man at table 7 was doing drinking all by himself. He pointed at the monitor, focusing on a man who had just approached Sophie. "That guy? That's Jake," Tony said, leaning in to take a closer look at the screen. He explained that Jake was a local gang leader, then asked Ben if the woman had done something to him. Ben gave a vague, non-committal answer, keeping his true thoughts to himself. To be perfectly honest, the luck of a protagonist is truly something to behold. Even Ben hadn't expected that when he stood up to 2 street thugs the previous night. It would turn out they were actually working for a powerful man named Big Boss Bill. The moment Bill heard someone had touched his men, he immediately started making threats. He demanded a direct confrontation at a prearranged location to settle the score. However, it turned out Bill had an old injury that bothered him, leaving him with a noticeable limp. Ben identified the medical issue at a glance, and, with a few quick movements, he cured it. Big Boss Bill was so impressed by this display that he began treating Ben like a divine being. He immediately appointed him as the head of security for his operations. Of course, Ben wasn't just looking for a simple job like that. He had learned that the health of the city's most powerful tycoon, Mr. Sterling, was failing. If he could cure such a big boss, he would finally have the influence needed to face his rivals. But since Mr. Sterling wasn't currently seeking a doctor, Bill could only place him here for now. And so, he ended up at the Blue Beck Bar, serving as a transitional security chief. Just moments ago, we saw him spot Sophie being bothered by Jake at her table. Instinctively, Ben felt that this situation wasn't going to end quietly, and he was right. That was why he asked so many questions, but he didn't notice that at the other end of the bar, inside a private booth, sat a man he desperately wanted to tear apart limb from limb. As he watched Sophie sitting there so quietly from a distance, his eyes began to light up. He wondered what the man was doing there, remembering how his old self used to flirt with flight attendants in this very bar. Feeling bored, he had also wanted to take a look around to see if there was anyone interesting to spend the night with, but he never imagined he would run into Sophie, the cold CEO, sitting all alone in a dark corner of the bar so late at night. He knew this kind of plot all too well. Whenever a female lead appears alone in a place like this, it takes less than 10 minutes for a few thugs to show up and start bothering her. Then, the male protagonist steps onto the scene to show off and play the hero, winning her over and gaining her favor. With Sophie sitting alone, he wondered if Ben was also nearby. As he thought of this, a faint, intriguing smile played across his lips. And the result was exactly as he had predicted. It was perfect timing. After waiting patiently for 2.5 minutes, several rough-looking men approached her. At the same time, he noticed that the glass in Sophie's hand was wobbling violently. To be honest, she was clearly very drunk. Seeing this, he knew instantly that the opportunity had arrived. Over by Sophie's table, a large, dark-skinned man smiled shamelessly while staring down at the woman in front of him. "Miss, would you do us the favor of having a drink with us?" he asked. "Get lost," Sophie replied, her head feeling heavy, yet her sharp character remained unchanged. The dark-skinned man wasn't bothered in the slightest. Instead, he simply smirked. "I like that attitude," he said, giving a knowing wink to his companion. The blonde-haired guy understood the signal instantly. This drink, as Mike called it, was his way of making an offering. Before he could even finish speaking, Sophie grabbed the glass and downed it in one gulp. The glass slammed back onto the table, and she uttered a single word again. "Leave." That sharp attitude left even Mike momentarily stunned. "Huh, I never expected you to be quite so direct," he laughed. Mike's tone shifted as he noted that he hadn't actually finished his sentence. What he really meant was that by drinking that glass, she had agreed to be his. With a sinister smile, he leaned in, remarking on how decisive she seemed to be. "You're coming with me right now, and I'll be sure to treat you gently later." As he spoke, his hand began to reach out towards Sophie's shoulder. Seeing this, Sophie snapped back to reality for a fleeting second. She realized then, with a sinking feeling, that she had run into a real scoundrel. The hand drew closer and closer, yet her alcohol-soaked body refused to move. She thought bitterly to herself that this was the end. Just as the hand was inches away from her, it suddenly froze in midair. Then, a calm voice rang out, stating that a guy like him didn't deserve to touch her. "Who the hell is this guy, and how does he dare to stop me?" Mike growled. Mike shook his arm violently, cursing under his breath as he did so. He prepared to throw a punch, but he barely managed to get half a sentence out. His wrist was suddenly caught as if clamped by an iron vice, and he froze instantly. It felt as though his vital points had been struck and his tendons severed. A sharp, piercing pain shot through him, nearly making him jump out of his skin. The stranger looked at him coldly with an unreadable smile, warning him to back off. He was told in no uncertain terms to get out of there immediately while he still could. Hearing this, Mike finally managed to free his wrist and muttered that the guy was tough. He decided to leave the girl for today, warning the stranger not to cross his path again. With that, Mike left without looking back, and it took Sophie a long moment to react. With a trembling voice, she finally managed to whisper the name of her savior. He asked her what on earth she was doing out so late at night. And drinking to such an extent, he wondered why she wasn't being more careful. His tone carried a hint of a reprimand mixed with a touch of weary resignation. Even Sophie herself found the entire situation to be utterly absurd. Normally, she wasn't the type of person to lose control like this. Today, for some reason, she couldn't think straight, but he wasn't interested in her reasons. Because at that moment, the familiar chime of the system echoed in his mind once more. He was congratulated for completing the rescue of Sophie before anyone else could. He gained 500 villain points and recovered 100 points of luck. He was granted mastery of hidden weapons at the maximum level. It was a truly useful skill, ensuring that even if he faced the protagonist head-on one day, he wouldn't be left standing helplessly in the other man's shadow. Looking at his stats again, he saw his luck had reached 800 points and couldn't help but sigh. With every passing day, hope was growing. Meanwhile, Sophie lowered her head, clearly wanting to explain things to her mother, but she remained silent, visibly weighed down by worry. He didn't press her for answers, simply gesturing that he would take her back home. Upon hearing this, Sophie tried to stand up on her own strength. But in the end, her strength failed her, and she slumped back into the chair. Seeing her struggle, he let out a small sigh and decided it was better if he helped her himself. Since she was a child, Sophie had never been this physically close to any man. But telling herself he was just her uncle, she decided it was probably fine and spoke up. She thanked him, and he simply replied that there was no need for such politeness with family. Without any further ceremony, he placed Sophie's hand over his shoulder and wrapped his other arm firmly around her slender waist. The system chimed again, noting he had achieved his first moment of close contact with the heroine. He gained another 300 villain points and recovered 100 points of luck. Hearing that pleasant notification, a faint, satisfied smile played across his lips. Deep down, he noted that Sophie was in excellent shape, her waist feeling both soft and firm. It was a pleasant sensation, just as the two of them were leaving the bar and approaching the corner. He frowned as we see more than 20 young gang members appear, all clutching steel pipes. They brandished baseball bats as well, blocking the path in a rather imposing display of force. Behind him, 3 men in civilian clothes stepped out from the shadows. These were the 3 elite guards assigned to protect him at all times. Taking in the scene, they quickly surrounded him to ensure his safety. The guards urged him to leave quickly and not to worry about their own well-being. Though they were highly skilled, the rivals were simply too many and all heavily armed. Fighting here would be a disadvantage, so he decided the best course was to retreat first. He looked down at the girl in his arms, and, without a moment's hesitation, he adjusted his grip. He lifted Sophie up fully, even though his own combat skills were at their absolute peak. He felt that getting his own hands dirty in a street brawl was beneath his dignity. The gang leader, Mike, noticed the guard's attire and let out a cold, mocking laugh. He mocked their posturing, asking if they really intended to stand their ground against him. The lead guard asked with a frozen expression if Mike really wanted to do this. Mike snapped back that he wasn't anyone's friend and signaled his men with a wave of his hand. He ordered his brothers to charge, telling them to beat the men without mercy. However, he warned them not to touch the woman as the group of thugs began to scream and surge forward. They lunged toward the group, swinging their iron bars with violent intent. The 3 guards reacted instantly, snapping their telescopic batons open with a sharp click. One moved to cover the rear, while the others stepped forward to protect their charge. The lead guard, Liam, personally cleared a path while covering the retreat. Seeing him about to escape with the woman in his arms, the gang grew frantic. Mike shouted for his men to go after the man carrying the girl. He ordered them not to let him escape, and several thugs immediately broke away from the guards. They lunged forward without hesitation, heading directly toward him. Liam's heart skipped a beat as he realized these lowlifes knew exactly how to exploit a gap. He threw himself forward, desperately trying to push back his own opponents. He wanted to turn back and save his boss, but just as he kicked one attacker away, 2 more surged in from the side to block his path and fill the void. Left with no other choice, he could only shout out a desperate warning to watch out. And yet, in the very next second, a dull thud echoed through the air. A gang member wielding a steel pipe was suddenly sent flying backward through the air. Confusion swept through the crowd as they wondered what on earth had just happened. Then came another crash as a second attacker was sent tumbling away just as violently. It was a display of precision so perfect it looked like a scene from an action movie. The alley fell into a stunned silence, and Liam took the chance to look back. His mind went completely blank at the sight of his supposedly weak boss holding Sophie. He watched as his boss calmly retracted a foot, having clearly taken down both men himself. Being cornered by such trash had, quite frankly, exhausted his patience. Sophie had fallen fast asleep, her weight against him making it rather difficult to move. Honestly, what a nuisance. He couldn't help but wonder if they were forcing him to be ruthless. At that moment, we see a relative of the original owner standing in the distance. Beside him stood Tanya and Susan, along with several other women who had just arrived. Upon spotting them, he simply raised his hand and called out. He told Jane not to just stand there, but to come over and help take care of Sophie. Now, Jane had been quite upset recently because he had blocked her calls. However, since he had given her $1 million as a breakup settlement, she was still more than willing to follow his lead obediently. So, she quickly grabbed Tanya and rushed toward the scene. He whispered a soft apology, telling Sophie she would have to stay still for a moment. Without waiting for the women to reach him, he gently placed Sophie on the ground. He shrugged his shoulders to warm up his limbs and then lunged directly into the crowd. Immediately after, the air was filled with the sharp cries of men in pain. Jane, who had just reached Sophie, stood there with Tanya in complete disbelief. It was impressive, truly impressive, and it left them both utterly stunned. Their hearts raced with a chaotic mix of admiration and pure adrenaline. After all, what girl doesn't appreciate a man who can provide and protect? In that particular moment, he fit that heroic profile perfectly. He moved with brutal efficiency, a knee strike here, a palm strike there. A spinning kick followed, the entire sequence flowing as if he had rehearsed it 100 times. Everything was proceeding without a single hitch. It was already past 11 at night, and the bar was packed to capacity. Witnessing such an epic scene, the crowd rushed out to watch, completely absorbed in the spectacle. Only Leo, standing quietly in a corner, saw his expression shift as he took it all in. He wondered what on earth was happening. Could Alex really fight like that? A tycoon who wasn't just skilled in medicine, but could also hold his own in a life-or-death struggle. To be honest, it sounded like another version of himself, and that was a troubling thought. Leo paced impatiently as the scandal unfolded outside, wondering if it was finally time to act. He knew that if they didn't show their faces now, they would surely be blamed for the fallout later. And who would want to take responsibility for that? Leo exhaled slowly, weighing his options. Finally, he told his men to go handle the matter, though he decided he wouldn't be joining them. Relieved that Leo had given in, Tony immediately called over several of his toughest enforcers. He rushed out, but the chaos outside the bar was already reaching its inevitable conclusion. We see the subordinates turning tail to flee without a single word of explanation. Alex watched them with a cold gaze, silently asking if they really thought they could just leave. He reached down, picked up a small stone from the ground, and tossed it with casual precision. The stone, as if it had eyes of its own, struck Mike right on the ankle. Mike lost his footing instantly and fell heavily to the ground, his escape cut short. Alex gave a low, icy command to his bodyguard, telling him to bring the man back. Obeying the order, the bodyguard grabbed Mike by the collar and dragged him back to face Alex. Alex then raised his leg and delivered a sharp kick to the back of the man's knee. Mike was already dazed from the impact of the stone, his senses spinning. He felt his knee give way completely, and he collapsed onto the pavement. Alex told him that in 3 days' time, he was to come and apologize in person. Otherwise, his entire gang would no longer have a reason to exist. Of course, if they couldn't even figure out who he was, that would be even better. In that case, they didn't even deserve to exist in the first place. Alex asked if he understood. His words hissed through clenched teeth. Mike stammered out that he understood and would do exactly as he was told. With his mouth bloodied, Mike was secretly seething with a quiet, desperate rage. He wondered who this man thought he was, demanding an apology from the tiger. But when you're under someone else's thumb, you have no choice but to bow your head. He could only agree to the terms, though Alex had no intention of letting him off easily. He decided that as long as the man could still speak, the rest was negotiable. He ordered his bodyguard, Carter, to break the man's limbs, much to Mike's horror. Mike's eyes widened so far they looked as though they might actually burst. When dealing with street thugs like this, Carter didn't hesitate for a single second. A sickening crack echoed through the air, followed by Mike's agonizing screams. The cries rang out across the entire street just as the job was finished. At that moment, the bar's security guards finally came rushing out, looking quite alarmed. Alex didn't even bother to acknowledge them, turning his attention back to the young man. The security guards rushed over, asking if they were all right. The 2 bodyguards replied that they were fine, though they were clearly struggling with the pain. We see that their clothes were covered in dust and bloodstains. They had taken 2 knife wounds, and yet, incredibly, they still insisted they were perfectly okay. Alex turned his head toward his assistant and told Carter to give them 10,000 each. He told them to go to the hospital for proper treatment and to ask for more if that wasn't enough. Upon hearing this, Carter was more than a little surprised by his boss's sudden generosity. He wondered how Alex could seem like a completely different person. Before, wouldn't he have just called them useless? Since when did he care so much? He had never shown this kind of concern for his subordinates before. But Carter didn't overthink it, mostly because he liked this version of his boss much better. Alex paid no mind to his assistant's internal confusion and continued giving his instructions to Carter. He told him to take the men to the hospital while he took Sophie home first. Carter started to argue that Alex shouldn't be left without protection, but then he looked at the thugs on the ground. He swallowed his words, realizing Alex could clearly handle himself, and simply turned around. He went to the parking lot to get the car and drove the 2 wounded bodyguards straight to the hospital. Alex, meanwhile, walked quickly back to where Sophie was waiting for him. He reached out to her, noticing that her forehead felt terribly hot to the touch. As soon as Sophie saw him approaching, she tried to speak, her voice strained and urgent. He frowned slightly, placing his hand against her brow to check her temperature again. She certainly had a high fever. At that moment, her friend Sarah said with a blush that she had checked Sophie's pulse. It seemed someone had given her a powerful aphrodisiac. Clearly, that glass of wine they had given the martial emperor earlier was far from ordinary. Watching this unfold, Alex felt a cold, mocking laughter rising deep within him. If he hadn't shown up tonight, Leo might have walked away with a massive advantage. He frowned again, looking down at the mess on the floor. He was beginning to realize the wine had been spiked. The trap had been set perfectly. It was also obvious. Too tired to keep overthinking the scheme, however, he quickly got Sophie into the car and sped off toward the hospital. Inside the Porsche, Sophie was completely dazed, her mind lost in a fog. She was burning up. It was too much to bear, and her clothes began to slip away. On their own, Alex kept his eyes on the road, though he couldn't help glancing at the passenger seat. To be honest, what he saw would have been a breaking point for any normal man. Anyone else would have lost control by now, and for him, it was a golden opportunity. But the system had already warned him. With ordinary women, he could do as he pleased. But these heroines were different. They were tied directly to the male protagonist's destiny. He knew he couldn't afford to have any distracting or impure thoughts. To even touch them, 2 specific conditions had to be met. First, the woman had to be in full possession of her mental faculties. Second, he couldn't use force. Otherwise, he would be facing some very serious problems. Now, Sophie was suffering under the effects of that spiked glass of wine. She was at her most vulnerable moment. But what would happen next? Alex knew he wasn't the protagonist. He didn't have that magical aura where a single night would make a girl fall hopelessly in love with him. If Sophie were to open her eyes tomorrow morning, and discover that someone had taken advantage of her, the protagonist's influence would likely take over. She would surely accuse him of assault, turning him into nothing more than a disposable villain, the kind that the hero tramples into the dirt until they can barely stand again. Thinking of this, he let out a heavy sigh. It really was a shame, wasn't it? Despite the missed opportunity, he decided that tonight, he would be an honest man. With that thought, he pressed the accelerator all the way to the floor. And so, we see him heading directly toward his own private villa. The idea that one must act on such medicine or face certain death is, quite frankly, complete nonsense. Reality is never quite that dramatic, even in a story like this. While the drug causes extreme discomfort, if one can endure it, the effects fade naturally in a few hours. At most, the person suffers a little. Before long, they arrived at the Lishan villa. When he helped Sophie out of the car, she was curled into a tight, trembling ball. She clung to him immediately, refusing to let go, her face brushing against his at every turn. She began biting at his neck incessantly. Realizing he couldn't dodge her, he braced himself, carried her into the bathroom, and turned the cold water on full blast before placing her in the tub. The freezing water drenched her completely. Sophie shivered violently, and her mind finally began to clear. Just a little. Now, scattered fragments of the night started returning to her. She only vaguely remembered encountering some thugs and being on the verge of a terrible accident. She remembered that the man had saved her. Suddenly, a vivid scene flashed through her mind. Sophie woke up with a start and quickly scanned her surroundings with wide eyes. The room she found herself in was remarkably large and filled with bright light. It was a spacious, sunlit bedroom decorated in an elegant, classic European style. With its gilded and painted ceiling, the place looked incredibly expensive. But this was a place she had never seen before. Looking down at herself, she saw she was wrapped in a thick, very modest bathrobe. Everything was covered up, but this certainly wasn't her home. Her heart tightened with anxiety. She quickly opened the robe to check her condition. In the next second, she froze in shock. Her underwear was completely gone. She collapsed, sinking to the floor. But then, she felt something was missing. Something didn't feel right. Although her head was dizzy, her body felt perfectly normal, without even a hint of pain or that specific after sensation she had read about online. A wave of doubt washed over her. She hurriedly tightened her belt and ran out. The entire villa was brightly lit, yet there wasn't a single soul in sight. When she finally reached the ground floor, that familiar figure appeared before her. Alex, also in a bathrobe, was sitting on the sofa with his legs crossed, playing on his phone. Hearing the noise of her arrival, he simply looked up from his screen. He asked if she was finally awake, which made Sophie's heart skip a beat. She asked how she ended up there and if he remembered what had happened earlier. He set his phone aside and gestured for her to take a seat on the sofa next to him. Sophie obeyed and sat down, first nodding slightly before shaking her head in confusion. She still had some memory of the first part of the evening, but as for what followed, her mind felt as though it were completely shrouded in a thick, heavy fog. She couldn't recall it clearly, though she had a vague image of herself hugging Alex tightly. The moment that thought crossed her mind, her entire face flushed a deep shade of crimson. Could that really have been her? Had something actually happened between her and Alex? As these questions swirled, Sophie came to a sudden, jarring halt in her train of thought. To be honest, she didn't dare to let her reflections go any further than that. Alex, for his part, immediately read the inner turmoil written all over her face. He noted that there were things she didn't remember well, and he wasn't wrong. He told her to stay calm and explained that a man named Bill had given her a drink. When she nodded in recognition, he continued to fill in the missing pieces of her memory. It turned out that Bill had tampered with that drink, adding something quite dangerous to it. Alex explained that after taking her away from there, his original plan was to take her home. However, the effects of the drug took hold far too quickly to reach her destination in time. He knew that if her family or a doctor found out, the resulting rumors would be devastating. So, he simply brought her to his house instead. Hearing this, Sophie tried to remember and asked, if that was indeed the case, then what exactly had happened to her clothes? He calmly explained that to counteract the drug's effects, he had her soak in cold water for a while. Her clothes had become completely soaked, so he explained calmly that he simply didn't want her to catch a cold. He told her he had asked the housekeeper to dry her hair and body before helping her into a robe. Sophie focused on that one detail, asking if it was truly the housekeeper who had changed her clothes. She clung to that point with sudden intensity, while Alex merely offered a casual shrug in response. He asked her, quite pointedly, if she actually believed he had been the one to undress her personally. Hearing this, Sophie felt a wave of awkwardness wash over her, which was understandable given the circumstances. Deep down, she had a lingering, vague memory of hugging and kissing him with surprising passion. In that moment, she found she couldn't even bring herself to look him directly in the eye. Noticing her clear embarrassment, Alex made a casual, dismissive gesture with his hand to ease the tension. He noted it was getting late and asked if her father would mind if she stayed the night there. Once she confirmed that nothing scandalous had actually happened, Sophie finally let out a long sigh of relief. He teased her slightly, asking if she wasn't worried about what people might say if she stayed. She shook her head, not wanting to face her family just yet, but there was something else happening beneath the surface. We see that her affection level for him had already climbed to a significant 62%. According to the system's rules, as long as these women felt a growing sense of affection for him, Alex, playing his role as the villain, could monitor their specific data and emotional states. When an ordinary person's trust reaches 90%, they become completely devoted to you. And once a heroine's affection crosses that same 90% threshold, the bond becomes unbreakable. Since there weren't many guest rooms in the villa, he chose one for her at random and added a final thought. He promised that once the housekeeper finished washing and drying her clothes, she would bring them to her room. This caused Sophie's mind to start wandering as she walked slowly toward the bed, looking down and discovering that both the quilt and the sheets were brand new and clearly freshly laid out. Realizing he had even thought of that, she experienced the genuine consideration of a mature man for the first time. This man was not only handsome, but also incredibly attentive. It was only natural that girls liked him. As she thought, that image suddenly flashed in her mind, his sharp features and defined face. She recalled his robust frame, his strong arms, and that masculine aura that radiated such a sense of security. Everything was spinning in her head, and she wondered if this was what it felt like to be truly attracted to someone. Sophie shook her head vigorously, telling herself it was impossible for her to like him. She was only 4 years older than his son, yet he was so sweet and reliable. Hugging him must feel so comforting. She told herself he belonged to the older generation and she shouldn't think that way, but the thought lingered. In her mind, an angel and a demon had already begun to argue, and as they debated, sleep finally overcame her, though she wasn't sure if it was the lingering alcohol or the deep impression Alex had made. The following morning, upon waking up, she noticed her robe felt a little damp. She quickly grabbed the robe and slipped away into the bathroom, terrified that Alex might see her. From outside, Alex looked at the bathroom door, feeling quite bewildered by her sudden flight. There were plenty of servants in the house, so he wondered what this girl was doing so early in the morning. Suddenly, he received 200 villain points. Without understanding what she had done to trigger it, he simply shook his head. He eventually walked away, while meanwhile, in a private room at the local bar, a man known as Tiger sat playing with iron meditation balls, his face turning pale as he watched the surveillance screen. The moment he recognized the young lady from the Sophie family in the footage, he wished he could lock the troublemaker away. He cursed the troublemaker for offending both the Sin and the Sue families at the same time. The burly, bald man nervously rubbed his gold chain, muttering that he would go himself. He decided to apologize in person, while meanwhile, the young lady of the Sue family, back at home, was replaying the recording of the hero saving the damsel over and over again. Watching him protect her so clumsily, a small smile suddenly played on her lips. She whispered that the boss even adjusts his tie while fighting, as she absent-mindedly stroked the silhouette of his profile on the screen, only to suddenly realize what she was doing. Blushing furiously, she tossed the tablet onto the sofa, calling herself crazy for such thoughts. But the deep red of her ears had already betrayed her true feelings. Just then, a servant announced the police. In the top-floor office of Building 15, right after Alex had assigned a new temporary task, he raised an eyebrow slightly and told them to let the lawyer handle it. To be honest, he wasn't worried. He twirled his pen with total indifference, knowing minor situations like this didn't require his presence. The sheer power of capital was on full display here. For the exact same street fight, the protagonist ends up at the police station while the villain walks away completely unscathed. That is the irony of reality. After hanging up the phone, he stood absorbed, staring at the model of the city, knowing that to crush a lucky wolf, he had to attack on multiple fronts. Intercepting his opportunities was key, but he also had to win over the female lead. He needed to strengthen his own power. He wondered where the limit of his coercion truly lay. The pen in his hand spun so fast it left a blur, a silent testament to his focused mind. He knew that as long as he didn't resort to brute force, he could control everything. We see a woman who seems to be struggling with her own choices, perhaps wondering if there was a better way. But instead of reflection, she chooses a different path. She watches a short video, one that captures the vibrant, musical life of a high-society lady she deeply admires. Deep down, she knows her current situation is far from that ideal. It is a bit painful to realize how many things she lacks, especially as she looks at the elegant designer outfits. She views these images as a tribute to the life she wants, scrolling through photos of luxury brands and high-end fashion. Standing in her modest apartment, she imagines herself surrounded by the finest things the world has to offer. These expensive dreams are all she has. Just as she begins to fantasize about a life of luxury, a shrill ringtone shatters the dream. The call from Gary causes her expression to sour instantly. "Haven't you had enough?" she screams sharply into the phone. Her tone is now completely different from her usual self, no longer sweet or mellow, but cold and biting. From the other end comes a weak plea. "Chloe, my mother was admitted to the hospital 2 days ago. She needs $30,000 for the surgery. I've barely managed to scrape together $10,000. Could you advance me the other $20,000? He asks. "What?" she replies in disbelief. $20,000? Do you think I'm a bank?" Before she even finishes the sentence, her face flushes with anger. She turns and paces to the end of the hallway. Gary, have you completely lost your mind? We've been together for a year. How much have you actually spent on me in all that time? Have you ever even paid the bill when we eat out? Have you ever bought a single movie ticket? And now, out of nowhere, you're asking me for 20,000. I'm so sorry, Chloe. It's just that I have no other way out, which is why I'm turning to you. We're still together, aren't we? Couldn't you at least consider that, he pleads. His voice on the other end grows increasingly faint, as if all the air has been let out of him. Upon hearing this, Chloe lets out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. Together? She asks. Do you really think holding hands a few times counts as being together? Chloe, what exactly are you trying to say? Gary asks, his confusion evident. Gary stands there utterly stunned, his tone shifting as the reality of the situation begins to sink in. We're finished. Did you hear me clearly? It's over. Gary is completely bewildered, unable to grasp how quickly things are falling apart. Chloe, is money really more important than me? Are you leaving me just because I asked for help? She doesn't hesitate. Yes, money is important, and the fear of losing it is even more so. She tells him she has decided to break up with him, her anger rising with every word she speaks. She reminds him that she earned this money through backbreaking work and sheer determination. She spent her days selling houses, enduring the scorching sun and the biting wind. And you just ask for it like it's nothing? You barely make $1,000 a month writing those web novels. How do you ever plan to pay me back? Gary can only reply that his mother simply can't wait any longer. Well, I don't have it either, Chloe says, taking a deep, steadying breath. Lowering her voice, she tells him plainly, Gary, the truth is, we have no future together. She has no intention of spending the rest of her life squeezed into a crowded subway car. This is simply not the life she wants for herself. On the other end, there is only silence. After a long, heavy pause, Gary finally begins to speak, his words coming out slowly. Chloe, are you truly certain you want to end this? Gary asks. In truth, she had been wanting to break up for quite some time. But because of her pride, she had planned to simply distance herself and wait for him to be the one to suggest it. However, he spent his entire day completely absorbed in his writing. He was living entirely within the world of his novels, never even noticing that she was drifting away. Chloe closes her eyes, lets out the finality of the words, it's over, and then hangs up the phone. She exhales a long, relieved breath, and a smile unconsciously begins to form at the corner of her lips. She remembers that she has to go to the coffee shop this afternoon to see her boss. Just thinking about that meeting causes her mood to brighten immediately. And it is at this very moment we return to the entrance of the Central Hospital. A young man sits slumped in defeat on the steps in front of the inpatient building. In that instant, he grips his phone with such force that his knuckles turn white. Only one thought remains in his head. Everything is finished. His mother is ill and desperately needs money, and he has already reached out to every relative he has. Except for one true friend who managed to scrape together 10,000. The rest of them have simply ignored his pleas. He had already resigned himself to the fact that relatives can't be relied upon, but he never imagined his own girlfriend could also be so heartless. She has the money but refuses to save his mother, and he cannot understand why. He cries out in a low, broken whisper, his voice trembling with a mix of grief and rage. Chloe, remember this, he mutters. The day I pull myself up, you will regret what you did today. Just then, his head suddenly feels incredibly heavy, as if a great weight has been dropped upon him. Without any time to react, everything goes dark before his eyes, and he collapses completely. He has no idea how much time has passed. Gary slowly opens his eyes and finds himself lying in a hospital bed. He is a bit disoriented, to say the least, but he manages to turn his head. Suddenly, he feels as if something extra has appeared in his mind, a massive bookshelf. And this bookshelf, strangely enough, is filled to the brim with novels. What on earth is happening? Gary is completely baffled by the sight. Without thinking, he pulls the first book from the shelf and opens it to the very first page. The story describes a world where combat power is the only thing that matters. There is no magic here, only a struggle for survival pushed to the absolute extreme. That single sentence is enough to hook Gary. He immediately continues reading, learning of a world where fortunes shift and one should never look down on a poor young man. The setting feels fresh, and the unfolding story is incredibly exciting. Gary feels as though he's been transported elsewhere. The more he reads, the more he is captivated. With every page he turns, his excitement only continues to grow. He tells himself this is how a novel should be, noting that the protagonist's life feels a bit like his own. Meanwhile, his loyal friend Sam, the one who managed to scrape together 10,000 for him, is heading toward the hospital with some fruit. Passing a Starbucks, he suddenly catches a glimpse of a familiar figure. Is that Chloe? What is she doing here? Big Sam is left completely perplexed. After thinking it over for a moment, he pulls out his phone to send a quick message, telling Gary that he just saw Chloe walking into the coffee shop. In a place like that, a single coffee costs a small fortune, which tells you everything you need to know. Chloe's salary isn't exactly impressive, so where on earth is she getting all that money? Sam turned the thought over in his head until, suddenly, it all clicked into place. But then he remembered they had only just broken up a short while ago. When Big Sam heard about the breakup, he was stunned at first, but then he spoke calmly. He told Gary that a breakup is serious business and they should settle it face to face. What's the point of doing it over the phone? Besides, it seems she had already moved on. She likely found someone else before leaving him. Could Gary really just swallow that humiliation? Gary's voice suddenly rose as he asked what else he was supposed to do. Of course he felt terrible. Chloe was, after all, someone he had truly loved. If he could truly let her go that easily, he wouldn't spend all day dreaming of getting rich. He wanted her to regret it. To be honest, if she really was seeing another man, there was no need for politeness. He had to confront her, even if things got messy. He needed to ask her directly, though Gary still found himself hesitating. Going to find her for a confrontation felt beneath him. It felt far too humiliating. But then he remembered exactly how she had discarded him. She had been so cold and decisive that he found himself gritting his teeth in anger. Fine, he told Sam to wait for him. He was going there right now. Meanwhile, we see a wealthy man named Kevin arriving at Starbucks with 4 bodyguards. As he reached the entrance, Chloe spotted him and immediately raised her hand to wave. She called out to Kevin, telling him he looked quite handsome today. As soon as Kevin sat down, he flashed a smile and let those words slip out. Chloe couldn't stop smiling, thinking that all her effort to look good hadn't been in vain. She joked that he certainly knew how to flatter her, calling him boss with a grin. Kevin didn't pay it much mind and went straight to the point. He wasn't one for small talk. He told her clearly that since they only met yesterday, they barely knew each other. In fact, they didn't know each other at all, and they certainly weren't friends yet. He noted that if she called him here, it was either for business or to get close to him. Given her current situation, he was fairly certain it wasn't to discuss a business deal. The answer was obvious. It was the latter. Chloe blushed at his bluntness, stuttering for a moment, unable to form a complete sentence. He told her that if she had something to say, she should just say it directly. Since he had already bothered to show up, he was prepared to listen. Hearing this, Chloe finally gathered her courage to speak her mind. She stated her goal plainly, asking him if he could give her a chance. She feared that if she didn't tell the truth now, the opportunity would slip through her fingers. Kevin simply smiled. To him, someone who admitted what they wanted was better than gold diggers who acted shy. If she wanted to be with him, he had no problem with that. However, he had 3 rules. If she could accept them, they could leave together right now. First, from this moment on, she wasn't allowed to get close to any other men. That meant no romantic interests, and not even close friends or brothers. Second, he made it clear he would never marry her, nor would he ever be exclusive. Third, he would be the one to seek her out. She was never to contact him first. His intentions were simple and blunt, leaving no room for misunderstanding. He told her straight, since she was willing to walk this path with him, he had a deal. He wouldn't leave her empty-handed, and he certainly wouldn't be stingy with his money. She could choose whatever she wanted, from the finest food to the most expensive clothes. Even if they parted ways one day, he promised a sum large enough for her to live comfortably. If she didn't believe him, he suggested she ask her friend, Sarah. Chloe was stunned to hear Sarah had been with him too, though it made sense in hindsight. After all, who would go around sharing those kinds of secrets lightly? He gave her exactly 2 minutes to think it over. Just 2 minutes. He wanted a clear answer, asking if she thought he would look down on her for this. Chloe bit her lip, unable to give him a direct response right away. She knew that to anyone else, her behavior would probably seem quite shameful. However, Kevin's next words caught her completely by surprise. He told her there was nothing wrong with living for oneself or seeking a better life. To him, outside criticism usually came from people who lacked any self-awareness. He noted that she was different, possessing both striking looks and an excellent figure. In his eyes, she simply had the capital required to pursue a more comfortable existence. Why would he despise her for that? Chloe almost thought she had misheard him. For the first time, someone spoke about being a mistress with such natural ease, as if it weren't dirty at all. There was no shame in it. He asked if she really thought he needed to invent pretty words just to make her happy. Kevin shot her a look, his tone carrying a hint of dry sarcasm. To him, coddling women with sweet lies was a task reserved for lazy men with nothing better to do. A man like him, a true gentleman of means, never bothered with such tedious things. About 20 minutes passed before he stood up, settled the bill, and prepared to leave. The moment they stepped out of the shop, Chloe reached out and secretly took his arm. Deep down, she realized she couldn't find a single reason to reject his offer. She asked where they were headed next, and at that, Kevin couldn't help but flash a small smile. First, they would go buy clothes, specifically, something better than what she was currently wearing. He admitted she looked lovely now, but if she was to stay by his side, lovely simply wasn't enough. Hearing this, Chloe felt her heart skip a beat. It was a strange, intoxicating feeling. And this, we realize, is what it feels like to be with a wealthy man. A single word is all it takes. The credit card comes out instantly. It's no wonder so many girls prefer this life over the alternative. It certainly beat spending a lifetime with a poor man. She remembered how her ex, Mike, used to take her out. He only bought her cheap noodles at street stalls. Thinking of it, Chloe felt a tight knot in her chest. Suddenly, a loud shout snapped her back to reality as 2 shadows emerged from around the corner. Before they could even get close to Kevin, 2 men in black suits stepped forward and intercepted them. Chloe stared in disbelief, recognizing one of them. Mike, what on earth are you doing here? He spat back, asking what she thought he was doing, claiming he had been completely wrong about her. Mike shot her a fierce look, his voice dripping with heavy sarcasm. Beside him, Big Charlie stared intently, clearly impressed by the way Kevin stepped out of the luxury car. He accused her of breaking up with him that morning only to be with someone else by the afternoon. He asked if she was just some schoolgirl. Chloe wanted to snap back in a fury, but she held herself back. She wanted to explain the situation, but before she could speak, Kevin stopped her with a simple gesture. He told them they had 5 minutes. With that, without sparing them another glance, he climbed back into the luxury car, flanked by his bodyguards. Mike and Big Charlie certainly hadn't expected that kind of reaction. They had come there to show off, hoping to unmask Chloe in front of Kevin and make her look terrible. But Kevin hadn't even reacted. He didn't even blink, which, naturally, was quite frustrating for them. He told her to speak quickly. Mike flared up at those words, turning his attention back to Chloe. He claimed that if she had met someone after the breakup, he wouldn't have said a word. But he demanded to know what she thought she was doing, finding a rich man before they had even officially parted. He asked her if she really thought there was any glory in what she was doing. Mike's voice dropped, sounding genuinely disappointed as he told her she wasn't like this before. His tone softened slightly as he reminded her that wealthy men are never short on female company. He warned her that while he might treat her well now, one day he'd get bored and kick her to the curb. Chloe finally snapped, telling him that even being dumped by a rich man was better than wasting time with him. She simply couldn't contain her frustration any longer. To be honest, we can't really blame her. She told Mike to stop lying to himself and just let it go. She pointed out that Kevin had everything, the looks, the money, and the talent. She asked what could possibly be wrong with being with him, even if he eventually left her. It would be her choice, and certainly better than a life with Mike, unable to afford a decent meal. She reminded him that he needed $3,000 for his mother's surgery. She told him she would transfer the money right then, pulling out her phone to prove it. With a quick swipe, the $3,000 were sent directly to Mike's account. Once the transfer was successful, she held the screen right in front of Mike's eyes. She told him to consider it a breakup fee, paid for by her personally. She spoke every word with cold precision, pointing first at herself and then at Mike. It isn't every day we see a woman paying off a man to end a relationship. She declared that from that moment on, they were officially even. She ended it right there and, without a single backward glance, walked away. She headed toward the luxury car, but at that moment, a system notification chimed in Kevin's mind. He had successfully snatched the ex-girlfriend away from the story's protagonist. And here we see the very course of history beginning to shift. For his efforts, Kevin was awarded 300 villain points. These points had finally reached the threshold required to unlock a new ability. The system asked if he wanted to draw it now, but he declined. He had only intended to use Chloe as a fake wife. His goal was simply to deal with Sophie, never expecting to gain extra benefits along the way. It was now perfectly clear that Mike was indeed Chloe's former flame. He realized it immediately. The system confirmed he had successfully snatched the ex-girlfriend from the protagonist. This meant that Mike was, in fact, the true protagonist of this entire story. Kevin found himself following the classic script of the wealthy antagonist destined to be trampled by the hero. He mentally ordered the system to scan the area as Chloe approached him. He quickly fixed his gaze on Mike, waiting for the results to appear. The scan was completed instantly, confirming the target's name was Mike. His luck stat was at 72, and his aura was clearly in an ascending phase. The system noted that his current value was growing too fast to be measured with total precision. Seeing those 72 luck points, Kevin almost thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But when that small line of text appeared underneath, he understood the situation perfectly. This man had almost certainly just linked up with a protagonist system of his own. His destiny hadn't fully exploded yet, so his grand counteroffensive hadn't quite begun. The key takeaway here is that this world clearly doesn't have just one protagonist. It was a suspenseful realization, and he sighed softly to himself at the complexity of it all. Although the villain points he earned this time were few, at least he had gained a valuable lead. Chloe apologized for making him wait, addressing him formally as President Ian. Kevin took one last look at Mike, who remained standing there, completely motionless. Having no desire to waste more time, he simply ordered his driver, Luke, to start the car. He asked Chloe if that man standing there like a statue was actually her partner. She brushed it off, claiming they had only shared a couple of meals together. She insisted they had only gone to the movies and, at most, held hands once or twice. Hearing Chloe's nervous explanation, Kevin simply offered a light, knowing smile. He told her to relax, claiming it was nothing more than a casual question. Even if there had been something between them, it wouldn't have bothered him in the slightest. He suggested they go pick out some clothes first, and Chloe nodded with hurried relief. A humble protagonist like Mike is far easier to manage than those who possess all-around god-tier abilities. Consequently, Kevin felt no need to rush his next move. Meanwhile, Chloe secretly messaged her best friend, asking if she had spoken to Kevin yet. Taking advantage of the moment he closed his eyes to rest, she kept her phone hidden. Chloe was desperate for information and continued texting her friend in secret. Her friend, Sarah, was startled and asked how she could possibly know about that. Chloe brushed the question aside, only wanting to know how much the breakup settlement had been. Sarah eventually agreed to tell her, provided she didn't breathe a word of it to anyone. She warned Chloe that if she dared to gossip, their friendship would be over for good. Chloe swore up and down that she wouldn't tell a soul, a classic promise, of course. The answer was $1 million, along with a mountain of expensive gifts. When they broke up, he had simply handed over $1 million without a second thought. Seeing that figure of $1 million, Chloe found herself completely stunned. She had never imagined that the wealthy could be quite so generous with their parting gifts. Based on her current salary, she would have to work for 10 years to save that much. Seeing that staggering amount, her heart felt completely at ease for the first time. She chatted with Sarah for a few more moments before quickly tucking her phone away. After all, she had to make sure she took good care of her walking checkbook. Suddenly, Kevin spoke up from the back seat, asking how she had met Mike. The question seemed to come out of nowhere, catching her slightly off guard. Chloe hurried to answer, explaining that they were actually from the same hometown. They had gone out together a few times and eventually became close friends. She then asked what he did for a living and what his relationship with Sarah was. Kevin mentioned he had a position in the city center, just a small business of his. He added that he and Sarah had been classmates back in their university days. They had always gotten along well, a statement Chloe made with total, practiced frankness. He simply nodded in response, choosing not to press her with any further questions. Because, according to the usual logic of these stories, before a protagonist truly awakens, the ex-girlfriend almost always finds herself becoming nothing more than a stepping stone.